Hello and good morning. My name is May Sim. Now today's webinar is titled The Second Wave. It's not over yet. And this is the 7th of the webinars that many people have called the tsunami webinars. Now today's webinar aims to prepare our audience for what is to come for the years 2022 onwards as the pandemic dies down and more developments are coming our way. So I'm going to start my PowerPoint slide, and please let everyone know if you can see my slides clearly. And so of course the first question that people want to know is, well, you've called this the second wave. Are you talking about COVID waves? Because the last time we checked, there have been multiple of those COVID waves. And my answer to that is no, that's not the wave that we are talking about. So for those of you who have been to our webinars before, I have spoken about having a tsunami come in multiple waves, and that the next wave is already on our horizon. But since we're on the topic of COVID, now for the people who are new here, and if this is your very first webinar, I'm going to make use of the COVID topic in order to illustrate to you what you can expect for today and exactly how this kind of astrology forecast works and how it pertains into our actual real life. So I'm about to show you a couple of slides from some of our past webinars so that you can decide for yourself whether these forecasts are accurate, and it also allows you to know how to take down the information that I'm showing you today so that you can make your plans for next year and beyond. So let me show you this PowerPoint slide that you're seeing is from my January webinar from the early part of this year. So this slide talks about specifically the COVID situation in Singapore specifically. And as you can see here, I have highlighted the time period between June to October. It's here in red color because we wanted our audience to know that because in January, there was not a lot of COVID cases in Singapore. And we wanted the audience to know that during these months, the numbers were very likely to climb. And again, in June, we ran another webinar where I narrowed the time period from where you can see the black section is when we noticed from the 28th of September onwards that we expect the situation to be bad. And then it peaks at around 23rd of October. And by 7th of November, it starts coming down. And just so everyone is clear, today's date is the 20th of November, so it should already be coming down. So if you look at the actual statistics for COVID numbers in Singapore, you will see that where we said numbers would climb was the 28th of September, and look at that number totally escalating all the way up. And we zoom in into numbers that are a little bit more recent. You can actually see that where 23rd of October is where it sort of peaked at its highest. And on the 7th of November is when you start to notice a bit of a downward trend. So as it is right now, you can go look at your numbers. And I think for those of us who live here in Singapore, you can be quite assured that that trend will continue. So it will simply go down. So which means you can sort of put diseases a little bit away. While in this webinar, we will not be talking about COVID anymore because seriously, aren't you sick of pandemic updates already? Right? Open your newspapers and your newsfeed and all you can hear about is COVID. And so what I'd like to request the audience to consider, at least for this webinar, is let's just put COVID aside because we have many, many other developments that you want to pay much more attention to than this disease that is literally last year's news already, okay? So as we look into the year 2022, what we see ahead is a completely new wave of developments that are coming up. And in fact, as we go through today's webinar, I would like everyone to know very clearly the difference between an event and an implication. Now, I'm also aware that for those of you who are new to these webinars, you are well aware that you are coming to an astrologer's webinar. And I know for a lot of people, you might have a pen and a paper ready to sort of write down the important dates, and then it may say something is going to happen. Now, I'm going to suggest that if you are only doing that, now that may not be the most helpful thing for yourself, because so what if you know that something is going to happen on a particular date? Because the only thing you can do is to sit there and wait for it to happen, and then you go, oh, wow, quite accurate. And I don't think that's useful or helpful to you at all. In fact, for all of today's webinar, I will repeat multiple times, if something is going to happen, what does it mean for your business? What does it mean for your family? And what really should we be focusing on? And usually we don't want to focus on the event itself, but rather what can you do right now, today, next week, and next month to prepare for these events. I would like you to imagine that back in January 2020, when I first ran a live event, and I told lots of people that there was going to be businesses were going to close down, people were going to lose their jobs. And let me tell you that the people who actually did take action were very grateful when COVID hit, and they were able to sort of transit their businesses online in double quick time. Okay, so that's our agreement for today. Now, for those of you who are first time in our webinars, what you will see today is what I call real astrology. So a long time ago, the really good astrologers did not do magazine horoscopes, and they don't do things like luck cycles. They don't tell you that if you're a rabbit, then your 2022 is going to be awesome. That is not the kind of astrology that you're going to see today. A long time ago, the best astrologers served kings and queens. And what we did was to advise leaders on famines or on war, and also risk of diseases and things like that, so that the country can prepare for things. Now, today I do not serve a king or a queen, and we have chosen to serve the public instead by hosting these webinars so that the average guy on the street can prepare for what is to come. So that means today what you're going to see is not sun sign horoscope, and I will not be telling you whether you will get rich or you will find a partner this year. I think you need to go to another website for that. But today what you're going to see is my calculations. Now, I understand that most people will not understand these astrological calculations. So I want to assure you that I'm going to present everything in clear English if you give me the opportunity to explain exactly what I see from the story that the planets are telling us. Okay? So today's topic is going to be divided into 5 different parts. And let me give you a snapshot of what you can expect for today. Now, chapter 1, part 1, is about why the world is kind of screwy nowadays. Right? And I think a lot of people are realizing that some of the old systems that used to work 5 years, 10 years ago might as well throw it out of the window already. Doesn't work anymore. And then in part 2, we're going to go into the economy, because then people are saying things like, well, COVID was supposed to be bad, but somehow the market hasn't exactly collapsed yet. We know businesses have closed down, people have lost their jobs, but things are kind of just slogging on, right? So what's going to happen, and how will 2022 play out for that? And part 3 is about the air era. It's supposed to be about communication. Does this mean that we're all going to get free speech? And part 4 is, if you start to notice that people have become very divided now, they're right down the center, left, right, and is there going to be unrest? We've spoken to a lot of people, and it seems that unrest is one of the big concerns for people in multiple countries. And the last part here is when, as we summarize what is happening over the next couple of years, then what does this mean for us as individuals, and how exactly will our personal small little lives be affected by all of these events? Now, before we get started, okay, I have a few messages to pass to all of you first. Now, number 1 is that today I'm going to be talking about multiple countries. And it doesn't matter where you're logging in from, whether it's from Singapore or Croatia or Denmark, but I want you to pay attention to what is happening to the rest of the world. Now, understand that a lot of people may just be looking out for, oh, I only care about my own country. And I think the lesson that we have learned over the last couple of years is that you cannot ignore what is happening in another country. Consider that some people in one country get sick, and before you know it, everybody in the world is sick. Right? So that means even as you look at the economic situation, the political situation in another country, please do not assume that it is not going to affect you. So I hope everybody understands, and please learn to see the implications of how other people's problems are going to affect all of us. Now, the second message is, I'd like to request that the audience really think critically. Even nowadays, as you go into the media, as you read articles, you want to really think about the information you get, and don't just take things at face value. And I'm going to ask you to do that even for this webinar. Because a major disclaimer that I definitely want to make at the beginning of this webinar is that, number 1, I'm not an economist, I'm not a banker, I'm not a politician, and I'm not affiliated to any organization at all except for my own. So the one and only expertise I have is astrology. So And the other thing you need to know is that I'm a showman, okay? So I have a massive audience today, and obviously I'm going to pick the examples and the headlines that are going to be the most sensational and the ones that drive home the point that I'm trying to make. So everybody needs to assess the information for yourself in your context. And if some of the terms that I bring up, some of the events that I'm bringing up are very interesting to you, I'd like to request, please do your own research. Please go and approach experts on your own time to find out more instead of taking everything that you see here at face value, okay? So I just want everyone to be critically thinking even as I go through these things. Now, the last message before we start is that I'd like to request, please don't do this halfway. And I understand we are going to spend a bit of time together, yeah? This is a 3-hour webinar. I know it is unusually long for a webinar, and I know a lot of people are going to get mentally tired throughout the webinar. I'm well aware of that. But I'd like to request, please stick with me, because what I'm going to present, each section leads to the next. And if you skip one section in between, you pop in, you pop out, and then the later sections are not going to make much sense to you. Another important thing is that sometimes this kind of webinar can feel very depressing, or it can feel like I'm giving you the bad news. However, I want to be very clear here that I'm not here to mince words and I'm not here to lie to you, that you are going to see these events playing out in the world, just as all my previous webinars have shown you events that have already played out. So I'd like you to stick through this so that as we talk about what are we going to do about this, because solutions aren't going to work unless we understand exactly where the problem is. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. I'd like to show you some of the comments that have been shared by the people who have attended my previous webinars. So there are people who said that this is definitely worth 3 hours of your time, and that I go at a very fast pace and the content is very condensed. I promise you, I'm not a boring presenter. And also that this information is tremendously helpful in getting prepared, and that I have predicted very major trends for the world for decades to come. So Hui Hun here mentioned a few countries on that list, and I'd like to assure you, today I'm covering more countries than that list over there. And also that it will benefit a lot of you who are key decision makers and business owners, and also even for yourself, even if you are none of those things. But how are you going to adapt from the Earth era to the Air era? And also, KK Hoy here has given me a very big compliment. They've said that I have very great unbiased stuff. You've been very kind, but I'd like to remind everybody that I'm just as human as the next person, and I can tell you I'm definitely anything else but unbiased. Okay, so please keep that in mind throughout today's webinar. And also, Dawn, what she has said here, I think is the best compliment that my team has received from a participant, because she said that it makes her question herself on whether are you asking yourself the right questions for your self-growth. We've lost count of the number of people who have written heartfelt messages to us saying that these webinars have really made an impact on the plans that you are making. Now consider how many people are making 5-year plans, 10-year plans, that you are really questioning, is this really the right plan given what is happening in the world, and because the world has changed already. Okay, so without any further ado, let's go into part 1 as to why the world is kind of screwy nowadays. Now, the best way for me to start here is to explain to our audiences, especially those who are new to my series of webinars, exactly what the Air era is. I'm going to explain this in much detail. Now, even for the people who have heard this from me before, because I do this in every webinar, you do want to pay attention because number 1, you probably need a refresher. And number 2, I'm giving you fresh information today. Okay, so what I'm going to explain here is, now, when we talk about the Air era, this actually meant that we crossed a line sometime in the 22nd of December, 2020. So that's about a year ago. Now, this line simply means that now if you recall back on that date, a lot of people were talking about this thing called the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. You may have remembered a lot of people going out there looking at the sky, trying to observe some major event. Now, most people actually do not understand what that actually is. To them, it's just something to see in the sky. Now, this is, without going into technical detail, this is an astrological phenomena that happens every 20 years. So it's not just happens like that. Every 20 years it happens, and each time it has an element. So whether every time it happens, it can be fire, earth, air, or water. So the one that happened in December 2020 is of the air sign. But let me show you something here. Now, if you look into history, over the years in last century, that every 20 years, you'll notice that there was a pattern there. That every 20 years, it was in the earth sign. That's why it's in that olive-looking color. Now, just in case you thought it began from 1901, actually it didn't, just like my PowerPoint slide got no space. But actually, it started from way as early as the 1800s, and it coincided with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So that's when the world became all about productivity, factories, offices, banks, stock market. It's the life that we know, and it's the life that we grew up with. Now, something happened in 1981. Because we again had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, but this time around, for the first time in almost 200 years, it was in an air sign. So those of you who are old enough to remember that period will recall how computers came into our life. You would go to a shop and suddenly the shopkeeper wasn't writing your purchase in a book anymore. He was typing it into a cash register. And that people weren't working with pen and paper. You had a lot of these electronic devices, and little boys weren't playing cops and robbers anymore. They were playing Nintendo and Sega Saturn. So what happened to the world? And later on, the funny thing was it went back very briefly into the Earth era. And that's when what we saw was a marriage of technology and money. So it wasn't just a website that was giving information. Now you had to click on pay. You had to pay on the website. And also suddenly all of these, you didn't just get things for free on the internet. What you had was e-commerce. And you didn't just use social media to post a video. Nowadays, it was all about advertising and pay per click and how much money you were going to earn from it. So we took technology, we took money, and we had them married together. Okay, so that was what happened. Now, what was so important about December 2020 was that now that we have crossed that line, today we are November 2021. You see, these conjunctions are going to continue every 20 years. But from now on, the Earth era does not come back. That means from now on, we have officially entered the air era. And what this also means is this is why the world feels so screwy nowadays, because those of us who have been brought up with the Earth era are still using the old methods to assess what is happening in the world. And that's why nothing makes sense. So that things that are not so valuable, somehow the stock price keeps going up. And things that are very valuable, it's people are putting their heart and soul into it, but we're scratching our heads and going, how does that work in our new universe? Okay, so this is briefly speaking, this is the air era. But now I feel confident to share some more information with you. And if you will bear with me, it's a little bit technical, but I promise you I will show you examples, okay? So the red arrow will show you just exactly where we are. We are on the cusp. We have just entered through the door, and all of us here will one day be known as the millennial people, because then we are the ones entering into this new millennial era. So what I'm going to show you is new information about planets like Pluto. So for those of you who are not aware, Pluto is a transformation planet. Every time it is in an air sign, and the last time was in 1971 to 1984, you'll find that there are lots of inventions that come up in the world that completely change our life. So as a greatest example, the internet has its birthday in 1983. Now consider how you can't do anything in your life right now without the internet. Okay, so that's how important this is. Now, this is not the first time it's happened. It happens every now and then. So the previous time before that was in 1882 to 1914. That's when a lot of things like the steel industry, modern construction methodologies, movie technology started to come up around that time. Okay, so that totally made a massive difference for people for even up to a century to come. And you know that the internet will also have that same effect on all our lives. Now, why this is important is because the next one is just around the corner. And that means that all of us are on the cusp right now for yet another transformative period in human history. And the next one begins in 2023. It's not next year, it's the year after. And this is why this webinar is so important, because if you don't understand what is to come, we don't even know what to prepare, and you might end up preparing Earth era things when you should be preparing air era things. So this is going to last for quite a long time, 2023 to 2044. Now, some of you have seen online that people have talked about how, you know, the sentence begins with, by 2030, the world will be fill in the blank, right? That you will have this, you will not have this. And for some of us, we cannot imagine it. Because right now we are just entering into 2022 and our world still looks the same as it has been for the last 5 to 10 years. And that's why for people to go, are you sure? Like in 8 to 9 years, we are actually our world's going to change that much. And this is why it's important to recognize how quickly things are going to happen. It is breakneck speed, guys, and you have to know about this right now. Now, what I'm going to show you another planet here is the planet Uranus. Now, Uranus is about innovation. It's about new things that come out in the world. It causes us wonder. It's like, oh, really? This is totally new. Now, sometimes when it occurs on its own, just like that, it will accompany a lot of interesting innovations and inventions, but it doesn't exactly change the world. So one of the times that it came out was 1941 to 49. So that was the World War II years. So in those years, there were a lot of inventions, but those things were pretty much only good for the war. And once the war ended, it was like people were not so interested in that technology anymore. Now, what is even more interesting is that later, another one came up at about 1968 to 1975. And what you want to absolutely pay attention to is what I call the overlap period. So if you see here, the overlap is between 1971 to 1975. Now, what usually happens when these two happen at the same time is that there are inventions that happen in the world. In astrological terms, it has a birth time. But when something comes into our world during the convergence, that invention totally transforms your life. And you must pay attention to this. Let me prove it to you. Now, in 1971, this thing was born. It's known as the Intel 4004 microprocessor. And without this thing, you won't be watching this webinar, either on your phone or on your laptop and in all the millions of devices that you have all over your house. Right? And in 1973 was when we had our first mobile phone call. And consider this one changed your life and it will continue to do so. And 1974, we saw the invention of the Altair 8800. You may not know what this thing is, but it's what gave birth to the wonderful career of Bill Gates and Microsoft. Right? So that's this is the birth of the modern PC. And in 1971 was also a very important year because then Richard Nixon went on TV to announce that the USA was going to take the USD off the gold standard. And this is also the grandfather, he's the grandfather of quite a lot of the financial problems that we see in the world today because it gave birth to our version of the fiat currency that we all use in today's world. All right, so now the thing is, again, this thing will continue. So then in year 2000, we again had the Uranus thing, and you will see what I mean by things that are not invented. When things are not invented over the overlapping period, it does not have the same power. Let me show you. 1996 to 2003, we had the Tamagotchi. It was hot at the time. No one cares about it now. Now, the DVD, it was hot at the time, but no one cares about DVD now. Okay, so what this means is that you want to pay a lot of attention to when people tell you that something is the next hot thing, it will be the next big thing. But if it doesn't happen during the overlap period, I would not be so sure that it is the thing that is going to change the world. So be very careful if somebody tells you that that is going to be the next big thing. Because you know what? We are on the verge of yet another one of those overlap periods, and those big things are not born yet. Okay, so that means be very careful what you go into nowadays. Okay, so look at where the overlapping period is. Now, the period is, it's not even a partial overlap. This is a complete overlap between the years of 2025 to 2033. That is 8 years. Now, in those 8 years are when we are going to see, it's going to be like 71 to 74 all over again, right? Those are the inventions that will change our lives for centuries to come, right? So the question is, what are we going to expect out of this? So let me introduce you to, now that we are in the Aquarius era, what are some of the astrological words that gives us some sense, you know, what to expect? So things like community, things like, we started with global, but thanks to Elon Musk, now we're talking about galactic as well. And then we also talk about authenticity, that this is not just about all the fancy packaging. We want things real. And then freedom, diversity. There's more attention on gender equality and racial equality than ever. Things are automatic now. Press button and everything is done for you, right? People want to get into groups. And there are also instances of people who are breaking free from convention. And I think what's most inspiring is the possibility of what stands ahead. So as I said, okay, so before I go into the next topic, it's for us to decide right now that as we stand on the cusp of this new world, I think we get a choice as to how things are going to play out. Now, as I go into the second chapter onwards, you will see what will happen if we don't actively take a role in shaping how that new universe is going to be like. Because I'm going to start with this, right? So if COVID was bad, but then the economy seems to be slogging along and it seems to be in recovery. So that's one of the biggest questions that people have. If COVID ends, yes, that means that, you know, we can go back to the office, everything's going to go back to normal and business is going to get back. Now, I started talking about this more than 2 years ago, and we've been warning people that it is not going to be the case. So if you are planning for that, you might want to revisit your plans. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the UK for 2022. Now, if you've been reading the news, now UK is having some problems right now because apparently Brexit is making a lot of problems with the supply of things like fuel and food shortages in the UK right now, mainly because a lot of the low-wage, low-income workers from other countries are not able to get into the UK like the way they used to. So it's created some very interesting patterns that we see right now. It's, the public is making fun of the fact that supermarkets have run out of supplies. So they've even resorted to putting cardboard printouts just to make the shelves not look so empty. All right, so guys, among the people who are watching here, is there anybody who lives in the UK or you've actually seen this happen? You know, just show some response. You know, and this is actually happening in the UK right now. And a lot of these, the gas stations have run out of gas. So if you drive your car there, the gas pumps have run dry because all the truck drivers have disappeared from the UK. So this is the basis of what's going on right now. Now, what you are seeing on the screen is going to be the first of many, many astrology PowerPoint slides that you are going to see. Now, before I go further, I want to assure you that I'm well aware that you do not know astrology. The majority of you have no idea what those symbols mean, and me putting it on the screen is not to teach you astrology. And trust me, you will not learn astrology in 3 hours. Yeah, but it is mainly to show you that everything that I'm putting on these PowerPoint slides are not of my invention. That means I simply am telling you what exactly the story that the planets are telling. So I will show you what I'm talking about and I will convert it into English for you, okay? So that you don't have to worry about not understanding what's happening. So this is a pattern in the UK that started right in the middle of this year. From 7th of May, it already started, and a lot of businesses became unstable because the supplies were not stable. So there are a lot of resources that are supposed to be provided by external parties didn't come in. And therefore, it meant that there were a lot of these about turns. People might have promised you, those of you who have a lot of business dealings or your career requires you to connect with people in the UK, you might realize that they're not delivering on their goods as best as they used to be. Now, there are also multiple other patterns where from early this year, from March this year, there are a lot of restrictions, there are slowdowns in a lot of domestic situations. So this kind of domestic situation doesn't mean your family and your home. It can also be the employees that are there, the goods and the tools that you have always relied on to get your work done. That suddenly people are being sorted and differentiated. Whether you are British or you're not British, whether you are from some other country that you're not allowed to come into my country right now. So that's where you see the sorting and differentiating. Things are slow, they don't move, and a lot of contracts and agreements have become blocked. So this is very important because it will lead to more financial backlash. So what has the response been so far is that so far it's all about showing that we have gained power and value. And so there's a bit of ego. It's like, oh, this is what we've always dreamed of. Wasn't this the plan? This is Brexit, right? And also that if this was a creative product, that now we are seeing the result of a creative idea, and this would have been the strongest in the middle of this year. Now, I know it's very hard to follow the timeline, so I'm going to show you something shortly, okay? But Boris Johnson has said that the supply crunch is good for wages. Okay, so that means it means that there will be more jobs available to the British people. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong, but I'm also showing you that this is the effect that it has on the people on the ground in the UK. So just in case you were trying to write down those dates, don't worry. Okay, what I'm going to show you is easier to see this on a timeline when I have the color bars put out. So throughout today, as I look at multiple countries, I will put out the timeline like this. So what you look for is, can you see here, J22 tells you this is January of 2022. And I will always start from November, which is where we are right now. So if you look at the UK, things are slow. There's a bit of the ego going on. But the unstable developments in business will last all the way until March. So which means that if some of you are expecting this instability to sort of disappear in the next couple of weeks or so, no luck there, okay? It's going to go on for actually a lot longer than March, right? So let's look at 2022 now. Next year, what can we expect from the UK? And even for people who don't do business with the UK, you might want to pay attention to this because I think it's going to greatly affect you and your finances. Okay, so the first thing that is, if you see a line cutting across like that on the number 5 and number 11th house, this placement is a clash between those who are the creative people, such as the business people, and Parliament. So there are some disagreements there. And because these agreements are not sorted out, what comes out here as a result of it is a financial loss. So you find that next year, starting from the 23rd of February, just round the corner, and notice that it will last for almost an entire year. And what I've written here is that growth and business are slow. There's going to be financial and job losses. The labor crunch will persist. The material shortage will persist. There will be a lot of clashes between business and Parliament, and it will be strongest in the third and fourth quarter of next year in the UK. And then on top of that, now this is where it's going to start affecting everyone else, not just people in the UK. Now, when there is a line that crosses between number 2 and number 8, in astrology, we call this the money axis. And in a country's chart, this will start affecting things like their currency, their banking systems, how the government is dealing with money. And this is where it starts to affect international trade. Okay, so the pattern here is that if this problem is not solved, then the outcome that comes out of here seems to be that people become very innovative. So what I've written here is that the banks and the financial institutions, because the problem is not solved and it goes on for a very long time, then people are going to have to find some creative way to deal with the fact that the country is hemorrhaging money. So that as you can see here, the start date is on the 27th of May, and this is a situation that will last for about a year. Now, what I want to explain to a lot of people, especially if you are new here, is that the start date doesn't mean that on this day, on the 27th of May, something happens. So please don't send my team an email going like, hey, it's 27th of May, how come this thing didn't happen? Well, there's a reason why the range is an entire year, because I think, especially if you're looking at world astrology, things don't happen in one day. They take months, weeks to play out. So it's going to affect things like the banks, the money that they owe to people, loans, reserves. And I've written here financial losses, the truth is revealed, because I don't think that a lot of people understand just how bad the situation is, especially if the media is not telling you. So by the time you get informed about it, it will come as a shock to a lot of people. And also that it will result in a very innovative handling of monies. This is strongest in the third quarter of next year. So let me show you how this will play out. Now, the reason why I say that the instability doesn't stop in March is because from February onwards, I've written here promises unfulfilled, financial and job losses. So even as of this moment, they tell you that, oh, we are going to sort it out, we're going to get the truck drivers. I'm not sure about that. And even if they solve the truck driver problem, then they haven't solved a lot of infrastructure issues. So if you want to get more information about this, please go talk to a proper consultant or a economist or whatever, okay? Maybe it's just an astrologer. But if I've also highlighted where the hardest period is going to be. And also we see that so it drags on for a while. By the end of May, the banks and financial institutions will get very creative. And by July, you're going to see some of these very creative ideas being talked about. Now, why it is time for you to pay attention, even though you may not live or work or do business with the UK, because ever since the air era has started, haven't you guys noticed that ideas have a very uncanny way of passing from one country to another? So that means, just conveniently using COVID as an example, one country locks down, everybody locks down, right? One country says vaccine and another country says vaccine. And some people say, well, we start firing people who are not vaccinated, and other countries start doing the same thing too. So please pay attention to what's happening in the UK. Right, and so when all these ideas start being bandied around, and what you want to pay attention to is when things stack up. So just about the early part of October is when I think they might come to some decisions that will affect a lot of people, not just in the UK. Now, the question that I think is on a lot of people's minds is that, is the UK preparing for a financial crisis? Okay, and here is where I want to introduce something that I've done in my research. I did a lot of research for this webinar because I wanted to know what might that thing in October be. And I'm proposing a possibility. Okay, so I'm introducing a concept to you today, which is called a bail-in. Now, a lot of people understand what a bailout is, because if you recall back in 2008, 2009, they took taxpayers' money to bail out the banks who were insolvent. So the banks owe money and the banks got no money to pay, right? It's really that simple. So what exactly is a bail-in? And it basically, when the bank owes money and they can't pay, right now they will cancel the debt that is owed to creditors and to depositors. In case this is not clear, a depositor is a person who puts money in the bank, people like you and me, yeah? And it also means that with a bail-in, the bank will use the money of the unsecured creditors, including depositors and people who buy bank bonds, and then they will convert the money that they owe you into equity, which means they tell you, oh, now, okay, I'm not going to give you that money anymore, but you can have shares in the bank. And the obvious risk to bank depositors is the possibility of losing a portion of your deposits. Guys, I'm not joking, right? So if you want to look carefully at the words here, and please do your own research, yeah? May is just an astrologer, I'm not a banker. So the thing is, if you think that this is a new thing, well, it's been done already. So bank bail-ins have been already used in Cyprus, and the bail-in policy was instituted, and it forced depositors who put more than 100,000 euros to write off a portion of their holdings. So people who kept a certain amount of money in the bank had to pay the price. Now, with the banking systems in many European countries distressed by low or negative interest rates, more bail-ins are a strong possibility. Now, this is obviously, this thing is being centered right now in Europe, but like I said, don't assume that these ideas are not going to spread, okay? And what happened in July this year, just a few months ago, the Bank of England published, listen to this, an operational guide on executing bail-ins. So it's quite helpful. It provides practical information on exactly how the bank is going to execute a bail-in when necessary. So, and the good news here is that you can totally verify everything that I'm saying because they have very helpfully published the PDF online, but you can very easily search these keywords and you can read the whole document online or on your own, but please do this after the webinar, okay? Please stay here, I got more important things to tell you. Okay, so now that's the UK. And this is why we want to also look at what are the other stresses that are going to happen. It's not just the UK, we're going to turn it right now to the USA. Now, first of all, there are a few things that you kind of have to know, okay? There are a lot of very major headlines that you may not have seen if you don't read news outside of your own country. Please pay attention to what's happening. And so this was published just about a couple of months ago. The US government will run out of money by October 18, and this was from the Treasury Secretary. So let me introduce a few concepts here. Now, something called a debt ceiling is a bit like the credit limit for a country. When they run out of money, they kind of have to go to Congress and ask for permission to borrow some more, right? And I think that's not difficult to understand. But what I think a lot of people have not realized is that in the last 100 years or so, the United States has already raised their debt ceiling at least 90 times. So please, again, go talk to somebody who knows about this. I'm just the astrologer, yeah? Okay, so, and the thing is, we start to see a pattern in very recent years that in July of 2020, so that's just last year, that Congress returns with only days to pass a coronavirus relief as the pandemic rages. Now, the pattern that I want to draw your attention to is that until they draw attention to the problem, by the time you see in the newspapers, by the time you see on the headlines, you only have days to react. Now, those of you who attended my webinar back in July last year, I also put out examples of how during the 2008-2009 the bank crash in the financial crisis, a lot of people were actually not aware that there was even a crisis until it came out. And by the time it did, the reaction time was only just a couple of weeks at best. So what I want to remind everyone here is that don't just look at everything that's around you and then you think that the economy is doing fine, no one is saying anything. Guys, by the time they actually say something, it's already here. Okay, so don't assume that things are going to be okay. Now, let's look at some of the patterns that's happening in the US. Now, when we have this blue color planet, now this guy is called Uranus, and it's a bit of a chaos shit stirrer. So when it's in the 5th house, that's when a lot of people have very radical ideas and they're getting a bit naughty. So when it connects to that line at the very top, it means that they are now challenging rules and regulations. So I thought this new information about the debt ceiling is very interesting. So what you get are authority figures. They start to get very irritated by opposition to policies. They feel that they are very impatient. They don't want to take the responsibility for things that are slow. They will feel caged in. It's like, why are we being stopped from things? You know, stop being in my way. And you'll find that it started as early as July 2020, which means it happened right in the middle of the pandemic. Those of you who are in the financial world, financial markets, you probably know what I'm talking about. That a conversation actually started for the last 1 to 2 years already. And a lot of these ideas are pretty radical. And at first, it is kind of half-hearted. But those of you who are following the news will know that the conversation is getting louder and louder. So there were 2 strong periods. The first was in July and to September of last year when the conversation first started. And the second one is coming up in just a few weeks' time, between January to February. Now, so if you look on my timeline, we are November here, which means it's coming up here. Okay, so guys, please pay attention. And then after that, we also have other small things like by November, 17 November is just 3 days ago, yeah, that there's going to be an influx of money. So of course, US is running out of money. Are they going to get more money? Yes, they are going to get. So they're going to smooth out the agreements with people who oppose. There will be immediate monetary relief, just like the last 90 overtimes. And that it will obviously affect their shared resources. Now, guys, you're going to see this word multiple times in my presentation. In a country's chart, when we talk about shared resources, it is everything from taxpayers' money to the country's reserves, to the country's investments, and for countries with social security, CPF, or whatever other monies that is kind of like anything that is everybody's money, more or less, is called shared resources, okay? Everyone be clear so that I don't have to write so many words. Just understand what shared resources mean. And this influx of money, it seems strongest at about this late Jan, early Feb period. And now what I want you to notice is that a lot of these black color periods are starting to stack one on top of another. And those of you who have watched my webinars before, when these things start stacking up, you know things happen, yeah? And it doesn't end there. So that there's actually even more. Suddenly now the radical ideas are getting more and more expressed, and you can see it starts on the 12th of January. That's just in a few weeks' time. So people are going to start pushing for an official endorsement of a very radical idea. But of course, it's going to face opposition. Some people will not like this idea. And in the middle of January, if you are following financial news, you will definitely see this being talked about. And this is the opposing forces. So the good news is that there are still some very conservative people that are not okay with this. And they are also pushing for an official decision. And the whole conversation will be very self-undoing. They are escapists. And I think a lot of people who are more grounded are going to look at that conversation and go like, they're just avoiding the problem. You owe money and then you're just borrowing more money to solve more money. And then now we owe even more money, right? Everyone understands how this works, right? So it faces strong opposition, again, affecting all of those things. It will be strongest just about early February, the first week. So if we stack all of it up together, guys, look at this. Okay, so that means we do know that there are too many indicators here telling you that the USA is going to make a very important decision just about here when it comes to money. And obviously, I don't know exactly what this decision is going to be, and the chart doesn't tell me. But I've done a lot of research for this webinar, and this is something I found on the internet, and it says that Janet Yellen has lent support for the effort to remove the debt ceiling. So in very simple terms, it's like you have a credit limit and now they basically want to remove the credit limit because as she's explained here, that is disruptive to put the USA in a situation where we might be unable to pay the bills that resulted from past decisions. If this was a human being and then you tell the bank that it's very unfair that you don't give me money to pay my credit card bills, let's just see what happens to you, right? But the USA is getting away with this right now. So, and I think what's important is that if you understand the implications of this, so what happens when people get to borrow money without a limit? So the thing is, and I think as we start talking about debt, okay, there was something very interesting I found online, which I'm not very sure that many people know about, but it's a link, okay? And I'm going to click on this link and I'm just going to show you very briefly because I found this extremely interesting. So this is from The Economist and it's not from some nonsense website. Yeah, this is a real thing. And what you see here is the global debt clock, and this is the current global public debt. Now, if you look at this number 4 over here, now you know that this is the million mark. Okay, and it's just turned to 5. So what I think is very, very fascinating is that if you kind of, that even before I even finish my sentence, that as you watch this number climbing by the second, I didn't even finish my sentence and it went up by another million. Okay, so guys, I need you to understand just how fast that debt is piling up. And that's why, look at the implications of when in the Earth era, it was very common for us to buy something and then it goes up in value and then we all feel a little bit richer because I bought this thing and then my portfolio is worth more, my property is worth more. But what's very important to realize is that unless it is appreciating at a rate like this, it is quite possible that every single person is getting poorer and poorer by the second, and I mean it by the second, if we are not paying enough attention. Okay, so that means you should start to question for things that are done so that we make more money or that it has more value, it's worth looking at. So this is a fascinating website. You can all go and look at it. You can look at your own country. So we will look at, say, something like Spain, for example, right? So you can actually go see how much money is the public debt, and also look at this in terms of the percentage. So 91.1% of their GDP is in debt. As to what are the real implications, again, I'm not an economist. Please go and speak to somebody who understands these numbers to explain the implications to you. Now, what I think is on a very grounded level, I need to understand that when borrowing can be used to facilitate spending power. If you want to spend money and you can just keep borrowing, then you kind of don't really need your job anymore, right? You don't need to work anymore because you can just keep borrowing. So, and also that there is no urgency to produce anything. And why this is important is because this is a very worrying trend that's happening, not just for the United States, but for many, many, many countries across the world. And this graph actually shows you that the percentage of the ratio between debt to GDP. So if you see that this is the 100% mark, and in fact, multiple years ago, the USA has already passed this mark. And what this means is if this was a human being and you owe more money than you can pay, that's what we call bankruptcy. So the thing is, why hasn't this happened yet is something that you want to speak to a professional and get them to explain to you why the USA hasn't gone bankrupt yet, okay? But what's important is that when the country is borrowing, it sets a precedent, it sets an example. And you find that the corporate America is also borrowing. And right now, do your own research, you will see that borrowing is kind of at an all-time high right now. And on top of that, it's not just the country and corporates, it's the regular human beings, people like you and me. A lot of people are borrowing money. So, and I think why I show you this graph here is that in 1971, when Richard Nixon took the USD off the gold standard, money was created. And the pattern that you want to see here is that the price of homes, can you see, this is the median average price of new homes sold in the US, started to rise like it never did before. So on one hand, maybe a lot of people thought that their properties were worth more money. And it's very common even in the country where I'm from, that people start to think that wow, my property is worth a lot of money right now. But I think it's very important right now that people must understand the difference between value and money is not the same thing. So that as money becomes more and more worthless, then of course things become more and more expensive lah. Okay, so that's something that people must understand as you navigate your lives from here onwards, right? So the thing is, as the booming property market, now this article was published in May of this year. Property market is still raging right through the pandemic, and therefore it also means that as the price goes higher and higher, people are owing more and more money. So basically, everybody is in debt right now. And one thing I want to sort of highlight here is, guys, remember, if things happen, and I'm not even barely done with my presentation today yet. Now, with all the other things that are happening in the world, if the loan defaults start happening, and it's not like this is new, it's happened so many times in recent history already. Do you remember what's going to happen if loan defaults kill the banks? This, right? So it's a bail-in, whether or not it's a bailout using taxpayers' money or using a bank depositors' money, either way you pay lah. Okay, so the point is whether it's bail-in, bail-out, bail-right, bail-left, right? You want to start thinking about the future of the monetary system and of the banking system. Please do your own research and go and approach a professional who can explain all these things very well to you. Okay, so, but for a lot of people who are worrying right now and thinking that the US economy is going to go down in 2022. Now, the funny thing is, it doesn't. It doesn't. Okay, so that's another one of those weird things that's going to happen in 2022. And I will continue this at a later chapter. Now, but in the meantime, I want to go into the very next chapter, which is chapter 3. And it is, does air era mean that we are all going to get free speech? Now here, we are going to start centering a little bit more closer to home. We are going to be looking at Southeast Asia now. So if we think about, before we do that, okay, let's just talk a bit about this Aquarius era. And much as a lot has been said about how the Aquarius era is going to have more freedom, there's internet, there's a lot of wonderful technology. Did you guys watch there are all these metaverse videos, VR videos? But at the same time, we also must admit that as with everything in the world, there's the upside, but there's also the ugly side. So therefore, and those of you who do know a bit of astrology, there are certain keywords that are associated with the sign of Aquarius. And let me do a bit of work here to highlight for all of us how this is going to play out in our lives. Now, first of all, we talked about community. And everyone's talking about that now. You're going to have an online community. Even companies are talking about creating communities. Then the question is, how come more and more people are becoming misfits? That along the way, you start seeing a lot of articles about people who have been cyberbullied, people who have been excluded. So that's one pattern that we see. And we also talk about this global galactic kind of identity that we are now Earth people rather than just being a citizen of your country. But at the same time, what the pattern that we saw over the last couple of years, now it's very easy to just say this is COVID, but the isolation is getting stronger and stronger in the sense that even as we look forward, where a lot of us are not going back to the office. You're not going to be seeing your colleagues, face to face like that. And therefore, is the isolation going to build if people are working from home and students are going to school from home? So the isolation is something that we have to accept from this point onwards. And also, even as we talk about authenticity, that we want people to be real, to come clean, but then another word has been coming up, is called artificial. That it comes out as artificial intelligence. They're talking about artificial organs, lots and lots of those things. And which one is it really? And even as we talk about freedom, but at the same time, there are a lot of people also saying that, wow, it looks like a lot of these developments are beginning to feel kind of dystopian. Right? And we talk about diversity, that we want to accept people of different races and religions. But then more and more, the point of centralization comes up. So here's the new rule. Here's what everyone has to do. Everyone has to do the same thing. So what happened to that diversity thing? And then even as we look at how our technology is going to make things very automatic, it makes things faster. And then they're telling you that there's going to be smartphones, smart homes, smart everything. And I sometimes when people ask me about this, I just say that, well, they said the phone was smart. They didn't say you got smarter, right? So that please be very careful here. And then the other thing is that we have automatic, but at the same time, Aquarius can also be about mechanization. That everything becomes very mechanic, and a lot of the human factor, the human judgment is not always there. And even as we talk about groups, us getting in groups, but then another thing is the rise of what we call hegemony. And for the people who are not familiar with this term, hegemony means that yes, there are groups, but there are some groups that are more powerful than other groups. Okay, so that's hegemony. And even as we talk about breaking free, then at the same time, there's also chaos, because how can everybody break free and then still have that nice status quo that we have been used to? And even as we talk about possibility, that we don't know what's going to come out, and we want to keep open-minded. But at the same time, yes, you can keep open-minded, but what now get is unpredictability. So what I want to show you here is a very balanced view that as we move into the air era, is it going to be one way or the other? I think we have to be quite reasonable here that it will be both. And I think it comes down to each person as an individual, exactly how you want to navigate your experience of the air era. So let's start with something that's a bit easier to resonate with. Let's talk about social media. And I think the last few years, it's just been a meteoric rise of all of that. Look at how many users are on all of these platforms. And so far, it's been, is by and large, despite all the criticisms, actually quite a lot of people have had a positive experience of this. Because let me show you here. Look at all the downloads, millions, billions of downloads for all of these. And if you look down this list, TikTok, Instagram, Zoom, and right now most of you are on Zoom and Facebook watching this webinar. And what has been on the rise is that most of the content that is on all of these platforms are actually created by real people. And the videos, the TikTok videos, and I think it's a new phenomenon that never before have people been able to have such a loud voice that you can actually, there's a lot of stuff that you can share, whether it's like, you know, how kitchen hacks and that kind of stuff too. I think it's great. Now, but at the same time, what we also realize is that as something starts to rise, as something has a power here. Now, for every action, there is an equal and there's an opposite reaction, where as far as free speech is starting to play out in the internet, but we also start to see that in Thailand, headlines like this, COVID-19 clamped down on free speech. And it's not just Thailand, isn't it? It's happening in India. India is clamping down on free speech. Africa is clamping down on free speech. China is clamping down on free speech. And so the thing is, even as the platforms increase, but people have there are more guidelines as to how they can express themselves and how they cannot. And this is a fantastic article that was published on the BBC by Luke Kemp. And it says that history shows that during times of crisis, there are politicians who will reach for more power. So he has also talked about some of these examples, like to monitor rule breakers. 22 countries have used surveillance drones. There are facial recognition programs have been expanded. Internet censorship has occurred in 28 countries. Internet shutdowns in 13. Internet shutdowns in 13. Now, at least 120 contact tracing apps are in use across 71 states. 60 other digital contact tracing measures have been used in across 38 countries. Today our audience comes from more than 23 countries, wherever it is that you're logging in from. And wherever you are, you probably have one of those things on your phone in one form or another. So this is something quite interesting that I found. And if those of you who are more quite interested in press freedom, you can visit this link. I've decided not to show this link in the interest of time, okay? So you can just go search for yourself. It's available on the internet, okay? But do this after the webinar, yeah? Okay, so now we're going to zoom in, okay, into specific things, patterns that we start to see in these countries. Now, I'm going to explain here that even as we start looking at country charts, I want everyone to be quite reasonable, okay? Now, just because I'm saying that patterns are happening in the US or in the UK or in Malaysia or God knows where, that you have to understand that the country is a very big place and there's like millions and millions of people. So when things occur, it doesn't mean that everyone gets affected. Is everyone clear with that? So that means you want to be able to sort of distill it down to your industry, your lives, and then to decide for yourself, how far is this going to affect you? Okay, everyone clear? So let's go into the charts here. Okay, to preface what has been happening in the last 1 year or so, here are some of the headlines that I found when I was doing my internet research. That it says here that Malaysia could have its free speech under increasing threat. That was in May of this year. And in April, 1 month before, repressive laws trigger massive press freedom decline for Malaysia. So this is not something that I'm making up. It's been happening for the last 1 year or so. So if we look at the chart here, first of all, this line that cuts across number 4 and number 10 is essentially, the 4th is at the bottom, which is like regular people like you and me. And then at the very top here is, usually it refers to things like authority figures. So when you have a line like that, it can be discourse, it can be a negotiation between the regular people and the authority figures. And so there's another line here, but I'll get to it. So what you see here is the rise of a bit of idealism on the ground. because this planet here, Neptune, simply means that people are, that there are a lot of ideas that are circulating among the people. And this begins, as you can see here, it actually begins strongly from about April onwards in 2022. So there are a lot of idealisms about roots, about beliefs, about spirituality. That means on the ground, we need to redefine perhaps like, what does it mean to be a Malaysian? And then, but you find that a lot of these ideas that are coming up may be very opposed to what might be a very practical and a pragmatic perspective from the authorities' side. Basically, you have two parties that see the same situation with very different perspectives. And also, you find that the people on the ground may resonate quite well with some of the radical ideas and perspectives. Now, at this point, I want to be very, very clear here that for a lot of people, you may jump to conclusions. So when you see things like the word radical ideas, then if I link it to beliefs and spirituality, now here's the not very good thing to do, yeah? You don't want to immediately jump to the conclusion that it's like, oh, it's radical something, okay? So no, it doesn't have to be. So if you notice, like in the US example, when I talk about radical beliefs, it's not always of a political nature. Sometimes it's simply people feeling like we want to define ourselves in a different way, okay? So guys, please don't jump to conclusions. And that this new pattern that we see here is going to be strongest in the end part of 2023. Okay, so that means even though it starts in April, it doesn't mean that things start happening from April onwards, that it's going to start building up in terms of this conversation in Malaysia. Then on top of that, when we look at anything that's crossing this number 3 section here, has to do with communication, data, the news that you read, the stories that you read. And Saturn here, this little brown planet here, sorry, just let me get my cursor out. This brown planet here can mean that there are a lot of guidelines, and Saturn can mean it's quite strict and it's quite structured. So the pattern that I see here is that communication could get more controlled. So this is a pattern that begins from April of next year, and it will last for the rest of the year. So you might find that certain messages, data, video, intellectual content might go into further restrictions. And on top of that, that red line over there suggests that there's some kind of official decision or a statement that will come from the authorities that will be very, very, it will probably show up just about the end of September and the early part of October in the coming year. Okay, don't worry, I'll show you all a timeline shortly, okay? And then, on top of that, okay, so besides just this line here, now if these discussions between the regular people and the authorities are not settled, the result that will come out of it here might be some unfriendliness, okay? So could there be some kind of conflict? Could there be some kind of backlash and anger? Now, again, I want to emphasize that something that occurs in a country does not affect everyone. Just because an event occurs does not mean everyone is involved, okay? So that when we see seems to be quite strong in the later half of 2022, and it might sort of move into the first quarter of the following year. So there could be people who are not happy with how the conversation is going. And at first, it will rise strongly. So what you will notice is that this discord might be strongest in that October, November period of this year. And after that, it will fade off in energy. Okay, but that doesn't mean it disappears completely. So let's look at how it all fits on the timeline. So first of all, in April, the idealism rises. And quite quickly after that, a lot of controls will start showing up to deal with the idealism. And then around the same time, there could be some opposing voices, okay, that might be quite uncomfortable. And like I said, that there might be some kind of official decision or a statement that might be made in the third quarter of the year. And it does look like the reaction to that might not be so friendly in all areas of Malaysia. Okay, so now at this point, I want to pause here, okay, because I'm doing my job as an astrologer, okay, but this is not to necessarily like scare people. But what I want everyone to understand is that for most of you, you're not involved in this, right? This is just a political situation. But for the average person who runs a business and you are like a regular guy doing your thing, so that's where you want to be able to think about how do you keep your operations running, okay, even as some things don't work so well. that you want to make sure that your goods and your services are still serving your customers. Okay, so please be clear between events and implication. You can't change the event, but you can change the implications of how it's going to affect your life. Okay, everyone clear? So the next thing is that is how it's going to affect people on an emotional basis. So what I want to emphasize to all of you now, Malaysia has got the moon. The moon is emotions. And when it's in Scorpio, sometimes it is when in times of crisis, you find that the tendency for people to react in somewhat extreme ways can be quite strong. And when the moon is in the 12th house, one of the things about Malaysia is that you could find that the people could be quite prone to feeling sad and discouraged quite easily. And this is something that we have to look at and address because some of the events could be quite distressing to the people on the ground. So what we see here is there are a few ways to describe this. Yeah, it's a pattern that I see coming up from about the 19th of May onwards in the middle of the year. And I'll start with the negative and then I'll show you the positive. Okay, so the negative part is that could there be a little bit more depression and disillusionment? And one of the things that you want to look out for, okay, so please, if you live or work in Malaysia, what you want to do is, if you are looking to support the community, make sure that people are supported, make sure that there are ways for people to sort of share and reach out if they are not feeling so great. So that the issue is that when people are feeling sad, it can be you can be very easily susceptible. You can be very gullible to a lot of ideas that may not be serving for them. Now, the positive part that comes out of this, which I think we have actually seen happening also in Malaysia, is that people are capable of a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion and helping the disadvantaged. So what this means is that a lot of this support might be coming from the community. And this again, emphasizing the positive part of the Aquarius era, is that I think we start to see ourselves as not drawing lines between I'm this and you are that, but rather to see that, well, if there's a situation, we all in it, and then we can support each other, okay? So that, and this could be strongest in the middle part of the year. Okay, so one more thing is, in fact, we start to see some indications of this. This is a headline that I saw that was going on in Malaysia of this year. Desperate Malaysians are flying the white flag. This was known as the white flag movement in Malaysia as a call for help to survive in the COVID-19 lockdown. Okay, so and what was very heartening is that a lot of the action that was being taken was on the grassroots, and people, regular people, aunties and uncles, were stepping up to help their neighbors. All right. Okay, then the next is again affecting their emotions, is that a lot of your emotional expression could feel very blocked. So that means it is quite possible that a lot of the avenues that people go to get help might not be so open. And if you notice just now, what I'll show you again later, but you'll see that the start date is about the same, and it says 19th of May. And so far, in my experience, that when the dates are very close together, it's quite often that the pattern affects around the same time. Yeah. Okay. So it's the ability to reach out is blocked from people. They might feel very unheard. And remember what I talked about, the ugly side of the Aquarius side is that there are people in isolation. There are people who are going to be misfits. So there will be a lot of emotional resentment. Okay. And again, it is strong in that May and June period. So this is where I'm going to add on to the timeline just now, that just around the time where a lot of people are speaking out, and you find that there could be people who are reacting to what is being discussed. Now, do I know what is going to be discussed? I don't, because the astrology chart does not tell me what will be discussed. All I can see is the effect that it has on people. So I know that people are going to be upset. So which is why for the rest of you who understand what's going on, let's keep people grounded, okay? And that in about June, July, that's when emotional expression is blocked. We want to find ways, even if it's not the usual WhatsApp and the Facebook, find ways for people to sort of get together. Okay, so that's something, and you can start preparing for that early. Don't wait until things happen and then you start preparing, and that's not smart. Okay, the whole point of being in a forecast webinar is so that you know beforehand what's going to happen, right? Okay, then now for the purpose of this webinar, I know that people will be concerned. Okay, so for Malaysia, I went an extra step. Okay, I didn't just do 2022, I also took a glance at 2023. So please allow me to give you a glance of what are some of the patterns that I see in the following year. that, so again, when we have an opposition like this that cuts across number 4 and number 10, it describes the relationship between the people and an authority figure. Now, this combination here, I know some of you watching this are astrologically trained. Many of you are my students. And you will see that when you have Saturn at the bottom and Pluto at the top, I'll be very frank here, these are not friendly planets. So the pattern I see here, it could be a clamping down on the freedom of people. So this kind of clamping down can come in whatever forms. It doesn't specifically say here in the chart, but it does look like it is connected with communication. All right, so this is a pattern that doesn't begin next year. Don't panic yet, okay? But this is a pattern that I see coming on March of 2023, and it will last for almost a year. The people on the ground might not be so happy with the control that is coming in, and there'll be a lot of facing authority figures, and it will be strongest towards the end of the year, following year. And one other pattern here is this green line here. And those of you who do know astrology, now Pluto is, well, its nice part is it's a transformation thing, but Pluto is also the god of death, of power, of domination. And when this planet is in the number 3 house, and the 3rd house, number 3, is for communication. So that's where I think the freedom issues will show up in this area. And what I think is that some channels for messaging, some channels for communication might not work as well as you expect them to be. So that, and the fact that both of these show up in March tells you that usually it's not a coincidence like when my calculations come out so close, okay? So that they could shut down data and they could shut down information. So for the people who are running businesses, right, who have families, please make sure the communication continues, okay? And that's where that will happen in the middle part of 2023. So just to make things easier for you to see and understand, I've put it on the timeline. So if you see J23 here, so everything that's from here onwards is from 2023. That I see here that freedom is going to be limited and that potentially messages could be shut down. Okay, and I have very limited time in this webinar, although you might go 3 hours, but I'm going fast because I have no time. And it's not just Malaysia. Okay, so there are going to be multiple countries that I don't mention in my webinars. And like I said, there will be, in this second wave, you'll find that ideas will spread quickly in the world. So what one country does can very easily spread to other countries. Okay, now I want to go to another country, and the next one is Indonesia. And I want to show you some of the patterns first, okay? So this one begins this year, and you find that anything that affects this planet here. Now, Jupiter is a planet of, it describes a lot of positive things like intellectual discussion, learning, sharing, broadcasting, people sharing their ideas with each other. So what happens here is, there is a series of listings, astrological calculations that is affecting this planet, this Jupiter planet, in the year 2022. So the pattern that you are going to see for this year is not going to so much affect the people per se, but for those of you who live and work in Indonesia, if I turn out to be quite accurate for 2022, then you definitely want to pay attention to what I'm saying about 2023. Okay, so if you look at March 2022 here, I've written here impactful discourse and journalism. So I think a lot of people are going to be covering very crucial information from here. So you find that this discourse, this journalism is very impactful on the people. And a lot of it is, the suggestion here, because it's in the number 12 house, a lot of it is going to be hidden. So hidden doesn't mean that it's all secret and stuff, but perhaps all it means is that it's maybe not on conventional media, that's what it means, okay? And that it will address a lot of power-related topics, and it will be quite strong in the second quarter of this upcoming year. And then on top of that, see this red line here that connects between the number 6 house to the number 12 house, and again it hits this Jupiter here. So this particular one talks about like victimhood, and it's not always a very friendly position, because it means that there are certain rules that will stop this journalism. So what I see here is that there's a bit of legal opposition to discourse that I think it's, if you happen to be watching this and you're a journalist in Indonesia, please take very good care of yourself, okay? And this is more likely to rise in the second half of 2022. So on one hand, the positive thing is that because of the impact, you'll find that broadcasting and information will spread quickly in Indonesia. But also just as quickly, there will be a lot of legislation that will oppose this journalism, and it will become strong in the last part of 2022. Okay, so let's put this on the timeline. So starting from about March onwards, you should see that the impactful journalism will start to rise, and it is black color, yeah? And adding on to a few other things, I want to pay attention to where it's quite strong here in May and June. So you should see some of the patterns showing up. It could be new guidelines about what you can report on and what you can't report on. Okay, so that's for those who stay in Indonesia, please take note of this. Somewhere in September, so some of these I won't go into detail, but in September there could be some another round of rules. Okay. Now, one of the headlines that I saw, this I didn't make this up. I got this off the internet. That in October 27, that's just about less than a month ago, right? And this is what the press is saying about media and telecommunications in Indonesia. That apparently, I have to admit, I'm sheltered, so I didn't know what happened here. But it seems that there was a pattern of Indonesia blocking the internet amidst social unrest, lawful. What I'm trying to show you here is that there was social unrest. The internet was blocked. Okay, let me repeat. The internet was blocked, and it has been ruled lawful that they can do this. Okay, so I'm just telling you this. So similarly for Malaysia, I thought that my audience would like me to take a glance at what are some of the patterns that might come up in 2023. So in 2022, it's mostly going to impact people who are reporting and people who are journalists. But I think in 2023, a lot of these patterns hit something else. So when you have Mercury is a planet of communication. And when it's in the 11th house, some of it can refer to parliament, but it can also refer to the masses. So it's in a way, I call this mass communication, all right? And it's possible that by 2023, you'll find that the blockages will extend all the way out to mass communications. So it affects things like the media, social media. Media is the official one, social media is the stuff that we post on internet, yeah? Okay, and all this will become strong in the last quarter of 2023. So what this means is that it doesn't fully happen in March, and it will just build up to the end of the year. Okay, and another pattern is what I see here. Now, when we have Pluto, now earlier in Malaysia, where we saw that Pluto was in the 3rd house, in Indonesia is in the 4th. So the 4th will mean like basically it's our normal lives, our daily lives with our families, with our homes and that kind of stuff. And you'll find that the same level of control is going to show up in people's lives. And sometimes it could be shut down or a denial of communication, of mass communications. Now, sometimes it's not directly done. There are a lot of other, the chart suggests that it's indirect. I also don't know what does it mean by indirect, but I'm just telling you what the chart actually says. And this will start to play out quite early on. As you can see, this period begins in 24th of March and it is strong from the start. Okay, so that you should start to see quite a lot of new rules showing up. So let me add this to the timeline. And in 2023, from about March onwards, you can find like the pattern here seems to be mostly for communications. 2022 is about journalists. The 2023 is going to go out to mass communication. Okay, so I think a lot of the messages that I had for those of us who live and work in Malaysia, I will also extend to Indonesia. And again, like I said, please pay attention to what's happening in other countries because it's very easy to say that, oh, it's happening there, it's not my problem. And guys, I think we want to see ourselves as global citizens now. We are all people, okay? And I'd like to show you this this article that I found on the internet, and that some journalists have started suggesting, okay, that post-pandemic authoritarianism is looming in Indonesia. Okay, so and some people have talked about a crackdown on government critics, and it hasn't let up. Okay, so I don't live in Indonesia, but I believe yeah. So that those of you who live there, please keep communications open, not because of any nefarious purposes, but because we have businesses, we have things to do, and people need to be taken care of, and family members need to connect to each other. So it doesn't really matter all this political stuff, but the people on the ground, you have to keep your lives going. Okay, so please, I'm telling you this ahead of time. There is plenty of time to prepare, and there's a lot of things that small business owners and educated people on the ground can do for each other. Okay, so I've spoken non-stop now, okay, for about an hour and a half, and we are about to give you a break. Okay, so this is the only break that we are going to get today. So once we come back from break, I will just go on until the end, right? So, but I want to give you a sneak preview of what is the next topic. The next topic is, will there be unrest in the world? And I think I also want to answer a very important question that lots and lots of people have asked me, and I'll put myself on the line now and I'll answer this. Right? So it's a pro-astrologer's opinion on, is it war? Okay, so we are going to go for a 10-minute break. We are just about 11:20 now, so it'll be a 10-minute break. But I also want to say about go have your toilet break, grab a coffee, and if you want to go grab a pen and a notepad, you might want to do that. And also, for those of you who want more updates, okay, please, you can use these QR codes to join my Telegram channel. As things start to ramp up in the world, okay, I'm working with my team, and we are going to try and get people as many of these real-time updates, and as I'm doing my calculations, as things ramp up during the second wave. And also, there are some people who are asking about a replay for my webinar. We are going to upload it. And in fact, if you want notified when it comes up, it's just all you have to do is go and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've got all my other previous webinars that are on there. So if you found some of the things that I mentioned was very interesting and you want to go back and check out the previous webinars, you can do so. Just scan the QR code and please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you can, send us a comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us what are the opinions that you have about what I've presented. Okay, so I'll see you guys in a while, and I will resume sharp at 11:30. See you in a bit. Okay, guys, we are going to resume. So get yourself settled. I know it's not a long break, but we have a lot to cover. So even as we go into chapter 4, which is that it feels like people are so divided now, is there going to be unrest? And for this, I will go right back to where I had stopped just now earlier, into part 2 of the United States of America. Now, the important thing is that a lot of this unrest in the US, I started talking about this as early as 2020 to sort of hint that as to what was going to come. And I think a lot of people, their primary concern is always about whether the market is going to drop. And I think there are a lot of patterns in history that have shown us that there are some interesting patterns that always happen just before massive difficulties with American money. Okay, so I'm going to go through this in detail, and I really want everyone to really pay attention to this part, because this one's going to affect everybody in terms of stability and with regard to the financial situation of the entire world. Okay, so the pattern starts as early in the early part of 2022, that again we're going to see this concept of the ideas are spreading in the public opinion. And a lot of these ideas will trigger things like anxiety, radicalism, rebellious emotions. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I think it's just at the beginning of this year, I think America had already shocked the entire world with the storming of the Capitol. And and I was quite glad that I had warned people ahead of time that a lot of these patterns are showing up already in the US, and it will intensify in the year to come. So it also means that people are starting to get themselves ready in case that there's going to be a crisis or a very intense kind of situation. You will see this ramping up from about April onwards, and then it will get very strong in about June. Now, the next pattern that I see here is of Neptune on this red color line. So let me explain something here. Now, this red line in astrology is a very sensitive one in a country's chart, because this line is what we call the foundation line. It is the roots line. So for a lot of people, a foundation is like, it's like your family, it's like your home. You want to know that you are safe, you are secure in a good place. So when this planet is Neptune, and it has quite a nasty habit of making things very unclear, and you are not sure anymore. So essentially, as Neptune is crossing down this line, the effect on America is that they're not going to be very sure of their security and their foundation. Now, for me, astrologically, in terms of the calculations, I have to admit to everyone that I am going to give you two sets of dates. Now, the reason is because Neptune comes very, very, very close to this line, but then before it crosses, it goes backwards again. So this is where I cannot decide whether it occurs when it comes very, very close, or it will only occur when it finally crosses the line. So I have two sets of dates here. The first one begins from the 19th of May in the coming year, where if this one is accurate, you're going to start seeing America slip in its foundation as early as in about 6 months' time. But if I am incorrect with this, and we have to wait until the full cross occurs, then it will only happen in the year 2023. So if you happen to be taking notes, you probably want to take down both dates. Now, what is the effect of Neptune crossing the IC is that there will be a lot of confusion among the people. And quite a lot of these people may not be thinking straight, which is why I think what was shocking for a lot of people during the storming of the Capitol is that they are not exactly your redneck farmer type person. A lot of those people were very educated. They were engineers, they were lawyers. And this is what I mean by the foundation is such that a lot of people are not necessarily making the most rational of decisions. And people will want to redefine what does it mean to be an American. And on top of that, this period also means that there's some idealism about land and property. Now, how can idealism play out? Sometimes it's just people feeling quite proud of what they have. Now, that's positive. But on the negative side is that this idealism can also lead to you should not occupy this space, or like this space originally belongs to somebody and I don't think you should be here. So when that shows up, you can find that that kind of irrationality can create a lot of problems on the ground for regular people who are not involved in the politics, right? And so this becomes strong in the middle part of 2022. But I've also written here that despite the rise, so even if I'm wrong and it doesn't really fully hit in May, it will rise, but then it will lose steam. So from August onwards, you find that the idealism sort of like, goes down a little bit, but it will rise in the second wave again in March 2023. So let's put this on the timeline. That first you have the idea spreading around April, May, and then that's around the time that if I'm correct about this black period, that you're going to start to see America start to lose its foundation. One of the worrying trends that could come out is that if you start to see people posting things online that could be, it might make you wonder if they're still thinking straight, okay? So there's one more pattern. Now, this one will be interesting in terms of the finances and the economics of the country. Because earlier, when I talked about some of the not so nice things occurring in possibly in their politics, if you expected the economy to go down, the funny thing is the part I couldn't explain is that it doesn't. In fact, it's super strong. So in fact, the labor market suddenly kickstarts. And although America had been facing an unemployment problem in the last 1 to 2 years, the unemployment disappears. Suddenly, everyone has a job and everyone's very busy, which is typically a good thing for the recovery of an economy. And this is why I want everyone to understand that just because the headlines say that, oh, unemployment is down and that people are employed, I know on the surface it looks like a happy thing, but let me finish this section and then you will understand why that makes me a little bit concerned. So from about 8 July onwards, people are busy and unemployment drops. And a lot of this new employment, this new activity could be actually very driven by a lot of disruptions to what I call country agreements and negotiations. Now, this kind of agreement and negotiation can be internal and it can be external. So that means if the US has certain maybe trade or business agreements with various other countries, and if that doesn't quite work very well, you may find that the reaction is such that, oh, now we have to do a lot of things ourselves. So that one might be a positive thing, but it can also be a part of an internal agreement problem. So if people start to feel like internally, like we're not happy with each other, and then there's a lot of stuff to do. So this becomes strong in the third quarter of the coming year. Now, on top of that, there are a few patterns here. On top of that, patriotism will start to rise. Anything that is hanging out here in the number 4 house means that the average household, the average person on the ground will start to feel like they have a lot of strong beliefs. And that starts rising 8th of July. And if you find that date kind of familiar, it's because quite a lot of things happen on that date. Then a lot of people will group themselves. So there will be a lot of opinion cycles, a lot of echo chambers. And that it becomes necessary for people to show their principles and their beliefs so that other people know where they stand on certain judgments. So on the positive side, or not so positive side, is that suddenly there will be an optimism about property, land, homeland. And sometimes it's driven by patriotism that I'm going to buy land in a certain space. Now, one of the effects that I think might happen is that it might start driving the property prices. And you might see it rise. It's one of the possibilities. I'm not saying it will happen. One of the possibilities is that property prices will suddenly rise like crazy. And when a lot of people do not understand where this is coming from, they simply think that, oh, it's doing well, my property is worth more now. And I think in the air era, people need to pay a lot more attention to that phrase, that my property is worth more now. If you understand what's happening in the financial markets, it's not always a happy thing. Okay, so then on top of that, this starts to rise even more in the middle part of the year. So for America, a lot of things are stacking up. So let's add on to that timeline. That of course the labor market will start to kickstart by about July in the midst of all that idealism. Then on top of that, the patriotism is extremely strong around this time. So can you see the stacking up is going up one after another. So at this point, I want to show you, I have already taken away all the astrology portion, but now I want you to pay a bit of attention to the astrological words. This one, in astrology terms, is called Neptune crossing the IC. This one is called Uranus entering the 6th house semi-square Venus. This one is called Jupiter sextile Uranus descendant. Now, I know this means nothing to most of you. But let me tell you something, I have seen this pattern before. And the good thing about America is that it has a long history. In fact, they are just about celebrating their 250th birthday, just about now. And I'm going to show you a pattern. Now, if you look at in 1955, this thing occurred, and that was when Uranus entered 6th house semi-square Venus, occurred in 1955 to 56. And then this one occurred, Jupiter sextile the Uranus and descendant, showed up in 56. And then this one, Neptune crossing the IC, showed up in 59 to 60 in the 19th century. Now, some of you who are familiar with American history will know what happened then. So what I want you to notice is the American Civil War actually broke out in 1861 officially. But if you go and do your research, it doesn't take long. Even if you just look at Wikipedia, a lot of the action, they didn't wait until the official civil war started. A lot of little skirmishes and conflicts and various attacks and things like that, they actually started showing up even in the years leading up to the civil war. So what I'm also showing you here is that notice that the official beginning of the civil war did not happen as these things were happening. They happened after. Can you all see that? So this is already one pattern. Now, this is not the only time that these three things show up at the same time. In 1939, this occurred, Uranus enters 6th house semi-square Venus, and this occurred, Jupiter sextile Uranus descendant, and this occurred, now this one is slightly different. This is Neptune crossing the MC, not the IC. But what's interesting here is that you see an intersection, that these things were not spread out over a period of time. They happen in very short succession, and they all happen at the same time. Now, and I'm pretty sure all of you know what I'm alluding to. We're talking about the 8th of December, 1941, when the United States enters World War I and declares war on Germany. Now, the thing is, again, the war did not officially happen until after all these things played out. So can you see it's an after? And a lot of these indicators are simply the lead up to a war. So earlier when we talked about this Uranus entering 6th house, remember the English words I gave you was that the labor market kick-started. People were very busy and there was a lot of employment available. And this is why now, if I'm correct about this, and if in 2022 and you see that unemployment drops and they're very excited about what's happening in America, go do your research, find out where are these people being employed in, what kind of work are they doing, and then you will decide whether or not the things that I'm predicting here might have some merit here. Okay, so the next thing is that you notice that in 2022, it's not just intersection, they are all happening at exactly the same time. So my theory here is that much as the Civil War, the first Civil War took a very long time to ramp up over a period of years, I think this time around, the ramping up will be quite fast. And it will not take years for once the action begins, it will come fast and furious. So but the thing is, what I see though in 2022 is that there are sparks, but there's no fire. Because as we have seen in the past, it's always the indicators happen first, the actual official beginning of the war comes after. So it is not in 2022 that that fighting occurs. But so there's this pattern here that happens in the middle of about August to October, third quarter of the year. And I call this discussions to diffuse the crisis. So the good thing is that the authority figures will step in. They don't want this fighting. They will come to terms with what they call rogue enemies. You are naughty boy, and I will have a conversation with you about how we don't fight. So this can refer to both internal or external enemies. I think those of you who are following what's happening in the US right now, when I talk about this with people, especially in my previous webinars where I mentioned this, and people are asking like, is this civil war? Is this Russians? Is it China? This pattern astrologically does not indicate whether it's internal or external. So the strong period happens in September. There are two strong periods. One is in the middle of September, and the other is in the early part of October. So what you will see in the headlines during this period is basically the negotiation talks. The good news is that the negotiation succeeds because what happens is that the fire is put out because the authorities step in. So both sides will make concessions that essentially there will be no immediate actual fighting. And it's driven because authority figures are like, please, let's just, kiss each other and be harmonious. So the strongest period is between about October to November, about for about a month and a half. Okay, so that's when you find that a lot of the activity will kind of die down a little bit. Now, but the thing is, if you thought that this was going to be the be all and end all, the fact is, unfortunately, no. In fact, the idealism will rage on. So if you notice, the start date for this is not 2022. The idealism has started as early as April of this year. In fact, frankly, if you ask anybody, it started a long time ago already. But this idealism is going to rage on. The confused ideas and discussions, people are not going to understand why their leaders agreed to this and that, and people will continue to feel like the cracks are showing up more and more. But at the same time, during this period, there will be peace, and there will not be a lot of confrontation in general. So that means, astrologically, it means that during this period, April of this year, all the way to January 2023, you are unlikely to see real actual conflict between the parties. And that's why I say I honestly don't think that you are going to see war, at least not from the United States this year. So this peacefulness is the strongest between late October to January of the following year. Now, I'm not done. Okay, so the thing is, I think what I'm trying to show you here is that at least in the later half of next year, there's going to be a lot of tension in the United States. And sometimes when it's so tight, all you need is okay. So after a very long truce, sometimes what you need is a trigger, and this is where it's strong. So you see, when the 3rd of September begins, that's when at the beginning when the September 1st begins, I think it's when people are keeping their weapons and then they are like sort of calming themselves down, and it's only towards the end that I think it will rise. So first, it will spark off the fight. There could be some exchanges, and the strongest period seems to be in January of 2023. Okay, so put it on the timeline. First of all, like I said, there are some discussions here. They are aware that things are not great. And then the fire is put out. So what this bar means is that actually as early as February, the authorities might actually start having a conversation already. But this pink color means that they are not fully reaching out to each other yet. There's maybe some half-hearted discussions. And it's only after things start ramping up in the middle of the year that they start getting serious about the conversation, most likely somewhere here in October. And then after that, but the idealism that was from the beginning, it will start to rage on. So even as there is no confrontation, this black portion here is when you should expect peace. And here's the thing. Now, I talked about this syndrome, this behavioral syndrome called the Trojan horse syndrome. And I first introduced it in my very first webinar in 2020, because sometimes when the situation dies down, and we saw this happen multiple times during the COVID pandemic, when first the cases go up and then the cases come down, and then everybody talks about rejoicing that, oh, this crisis is over, then we can all go back to our lives. And I think that is something that people don't want to be lulled into a false sense of security. Like, just because the authorities stepped in, you don't want to assume that, oh, means from now on everything is going to be okay. And I think that's not great, because it means that people will be caught unawares, that you just go to sleep and then and you're not paying attention. Because the truth begins from here. So from September onwards, you find that they are like all shake hands and be good to each other. And I think from about Jan onwards, that's when the transits, the listings, it doesn't look so friendly, okay, for the United States. So like I said, whether or not I'm correct about this portion, in any case, even if I'm wrong here, by about March, I think a lot of the foundations of the US is not going to be the same as the United States that we've all grown up with, the superpower that we think it is. And I'm not the only person who's saying this. Some people have reacted to various organizations saying that the United States will cease to be a superpower. Professionally, what I see from my astrological calculations is I concur and I agree with that. I don't actually see the US continuing to be the superpower that it used to be. Okay, so the question that everyone wants to know, okay, so all I can give you, I'm not a politician and I don't study economics. I can only tell you a professional astrologer's opinion on, is it war? Now, if you were to go and actually search, in 1861, those of you who are not familiar, this thing is a Confederate flag, and it shows the fight between the North and the South in the American Civil War. But today, if you go online, you look at a lot of these forums and reports, even by conventional media, there are lots of parades right now where this flag is showing up over and over again. And then there are people asking me, is it more similar to the American Civil War? Is it more similar to the anti-Nazi thing or the Nazi movement? Right now, I look at this picture, it's like, you take your pick. It seems like both are on the list also. Okay, so the thing is, some people want to ask, so is it an internal or an external war? So the American Civil War had the IC, the World War II had the MC. So it's basically an internal war or an external war. This time around, it is Neptune crossing the IC. So if there's going to be a skirmish, I think we are looking more at an internal rather than an external war, okay? And there are a few other things that I found off the internet, and I'm just sharing this with you. That in 2014, if you ask an average American, do you live in a household with a gun? And the answer used to be just about 42%, okay, which is, if you ask me, still very high, yeah? Now, that's in 2017. And in 2020 to 2021, these are the statistics, and I'm not even showing you all the states. So basically, gun sales has shot out like crazy in the last 1 year or so. So I don't have updates on this survey for this year, but I think it's quite safe to say that it's no longer 42%. So that means if the majority of households in the US have a gun, all it needs is a few irrational people to set something off. Okay, and that's why it's very important to understand that if you live or work in the United States, then you do want to make plans, because it doesn't matter whether or not you are personally involved in all this political stuff, but does it affect the people on the ground, regular aunties and uncles who are just going about their lives? It will. Okay, so the question is, then for the rest of us who you may live very, very far away from the US, so why should you care and why should you give a damn? And I'm also going to show you a few things about what I found off the internet, my own personal experience when doing my research. And I want to show you how you really must practice critical thinking when you are looking at information off anywhere, including this webinar. Now, the thing is, the USA has actually used fighting to improve the economy before. Let me show you. So these are details from back in 1930 something. This line here shows, this is around the time, 39 to 40 is when the draft occurred. So they started recruiting young men to join the army against Germany. And this second line here is when the war actually happened. Now, what I want you to look at is the unemployment rate. Can you see, like, basically, USA was not in a good place. Unemployment rate was at 19%, which means 1 in 5 people got no job. By the time they were done with this whole shebang, unemployment rate was like 2%. Look at it. And then the GDP was not doing great in 1939, and then they had a war, and oh my God, like it made a lot of people very rich, right? And on top of that, the inflation rate, okay, so this one is where it starts to bother us, because the inflation rate can soar all the way up to about 10%. At its highest at Pearl Harbor, it was about 10%. And guys, we're talking about the USD here. Okay, so you all want to pay a lot of attention to this, because will it affect businesses? Will it affect our daily lives? I think the answer is yes. Okay, so I did a lot of research, and if you look into the media, like a lot of people are talking about this. So is hyperinflation, or is it just high inflation? So I got this off a Straits Times articles that when super inflation shows up, it's usually because either the central bank is printing massive amount of money, it could be to finance a war, or it may be as a result of productive capacity being destroyed in the fighting. Now, I want everyone to realize that right now in 2021, a lot of countries are recovering from productive capacity being down already because of the COVID pandemic. And people are just trying to ramp themselves up back to its normal production capacity. Now, this happening in the US is going to put a spanner in the works. And that which means the production that a lot of people are expecting, the kind of recovery that you're expecting may not occur in the United States if what I'm predicting here actually comes to pass. So, and we also say that the curse of hyperinflation has only reared its ugly head when the supply of money has no natural constraints, that there is no ceiling, there is no limit to how much can be printed. And that means that the rest of the world is now potentially at the mercy of some irrational decisions. And I really cannot emphasize how, I don't care how far away from the US you are, you must pay attention to this. Okay, so I did some research. I wanted to know what then would have been the highest inflation rate that has ever happened in the US. So I went to Google and I typed highest inflation rate in US history. And this is what Google showed to me. So they gave me this article and they said, since the founding of the United States in 1776, the highest year-on-year inflation rate observed was 29.78%. And I was thinking, well, I mean, it's high. Like seriously, that's like 30% inflation is high, okay? But to say that it was like, wow, like hyperinflation, like few thousand%, well, I mean, no, right? And the thing is, I went and did even more research because I'm not really sure I believe what Google says there. And here's what I found. Now, during the American Civil War, back in the 1800s, the Confederate people had their own currency. So it was a bit like a Confederate dollar. If you look at this graph, at one point, it went up to 5,000 over percent. Okay, so at this point is when the currency died, really. And that's why the Confederate dollar doesn't exist anymore. So here's the funny thing about automated Google searches is that when you ask about the US dollar, it is true that the US dollar has never hyperinflated, but it is not true that the United States has never seen hyperinflation. It happened with the Confederate dollar. So if you what I want to draw your attention to here is in 1864, something very interesting occurred. Because usually when the inflation occurs, it goes all the way up and then it's gone case, right? But look at how effectively they were able to bring down the inflation. And in such a short time, within a year, they brought inflation down from 700% down to 53%. Okay, so I was very intrigued. It's like, okay, so what magic trick did they do? And let me tell you, please pay attention here. Now, it says here that in February of that year, the Confederate Congress decreed a currency reform. All bills greater than $5 were to be converted into bonds paying 4%. Now, the people who have been watching this right from the very start, you might recall I mentioned something very early on, something called a bail-in. Now, it sounds not exactly the same, but very similar. So that means when money loses its value, and what they do is that if you have a lot of money, then it gets converted into a bond or it gets converted into equity that apparently paying you whatever percent, and you know what happened to their money after, right? So the thing is, and it says here, all bills not converted by April the 1st will be exchanged for a new issue at a ratio of 2-for-3. Okay, so the thing is, I want people to realize that if a lot of the patterns, history is repeating itself. And when you speak to professionals, I've said this in previous webinars, that when you listen to another professional of other disciplines other than astrology, talk about history, please pay attention if their history only runs for 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, and they tell you in history it has never happened. I think their history hasn't gone back far enough, right? And I tell you, history repeats itself. So one last thing I want to say is that America is is celebrating its 250th birthday. And some of the patterns that we want to really pay attention to is something called a Pluto return. And the Pluto is, as I said, is the god of death. And if you ask most historians, it's quite commonly known that a lot of empires pretty much last about 250 years. And on the 250 mark, it is what we call the make it or break it. There are empires that have survived longer. So Japan has been around for a very long time, but you know the shogun disappeared, right? So the thing is, what you want to understand is that America will undergo a very massive change. So their Pluto return is between February 2022 until the 1st of November 2023. And these 2 years, the second wave of our transit from Earth to Air era will see the make it or break it for the United States. So but I have to be very honest, okay, I'm an astrologer and I can read the chart. So what I see here is themes of danger, fear, a lot of power issues. I see a lot of self-undoing, which means that it doesn't look like they're going to be invaded. It doesn't look like they're going to be attacked. All the chart tells me is the word self-undoing. And there's also a remote possibility that there could be a complete transformation, that they will find a new way to forge a new identity. Okay, but what's important for everyone to understand is that another theme that is super strong for this particular make it or break it, because it's in the number 2 house, that their transformation will come in the form of money, resources, and values. And I'd like you to do some research to know if you work for a company, if you're for whatever country, it's go and think about the effect, okay, of the USD and what it is going to mean for everybody in the world. Okay, and this will be strongest in the later half of 2023. Okay, so the thing is, now I have to go faster because I have so much to cover. Okay, and it's not just Yankee Doodle Dandy. There are several other countries with patterns that we must pay attention to. Next one on the list is India. So in India in 2022. I have to confess that I did not know about all these events that were happening in India until I did my calculations. And I have to confess, I scratched my head for a long time and I had to do extensive research just to find this information. Now, the pattern that I see most strongly in India here is the line cuts across the 3 and 9 axis. Now, this is usually what we call the intellectual axis. That is the way people think. It's the way it's our beliefs and how we discuss and how we negotiate with that. Now, anything that affects the moon, earlier, what we saw with Malaysia is anything that hits the moon will start to affect the regular people that is on the ground. So not the politicians, but we're talking about like aunties and uncles on the ground. Now, what I see here is that there's a denial and oppression of beliefs and of people's lives. This starts as early as the 3rd of February 2022. So what I have seen here is that when Pluto is in the number 9 house, all the way up here, is that there is a powerful new belief, there's a new idea, a new philosophy that is permeating India, and that it will have a major impact on people and how they feel about things. Now, it can be very conservative because the signs involved here are Capricorn and Cancer. Now, these two as a whole is very conservative. People are not necessarily as open or freedom-oriented as the Air era is trying to be. So it will make certain people who don't belong in that group. Now, I talk about misfit, I talk about isolation, and some people are going to feel a bit rejected and insecure. So this is, again, strongest in the last part of 2023. So it will start building up from 3rd February onwards. And then on top of that, this placement here tells me that there are some restrictions on beliefs. So and that's why I said, can you see again, it's February. So I see that there are certain restrictions that will come from an official body that will restrict the other people who don't belong to us and their resources as well. So it could be that you cannot do certain things or you cannot use your resources in a certain way. And then it will clamp down on people who don't believe the same thing as them. And that's where it will be strong in the 3rd quarter of the upcoming year. And then on top of that, this section here that runs across the 6 and 12 can be Uranus is chaos, and when it shows up here in the 12th house, one of the meanings of the number 12 house is for people who are disadvantaged, so that there will be specific communities in India who may not be in a powerful position, and they may not be experiencing a lot of stability in India. And I would even go as far as to say that sometimes it can go as far as some form of even violence and opposition to beliefs. It will start to ramp up strongly from July onwards. So there are rogue responses to the other, and their resources and like strong there. I'm not done. Okay, so and for the average person, when this cuts down between 5 and 11, it also means that on the ground with like regular people, the planets of Jupiter and Neptune here actually suggest that it is to do with even the average person and your beliefs, what's happening in our society. So you find that the community becomes more and more religious. And also the rise of beliefs, like a new religion, and a lot of this identity. So that means when you ask yourself, like, what does it mean to be Indian? And it could be built around a religious or spiritual belief. And there may even be laws against certain beliefs. So in that sense, what I want to emphasize here is that the openness of an expression of beliefs might be quite restricted in India in the upcoming years. So let's put this in the timeline. It starts from February. There's a denial and oppression of beliefs. And then it may be accompanied with some official restrictions on what some people can do and what they cannot do. And then by about July, people are not so friendly. And at the same time, the religiousness will start to rise. Now, those of you who are familiar with history, I mean, the story that I'm telling it sounds a bit familiar. It didn't happen in India. It happened. The patterns that I'm seeing here happen in a very different country, and I don't think we like the outcome of that. Okay, so and there are some other patterns here. These sections where you start to see the stack up is when you will probably notice more of the activity is ramping up. Now, I in the interest of time, I'm not going to show more charts because it's not like you can read. Most of you can't read them. So I'd rather just give you a quick glance of 2023 and all these patterns that I see in 2022, they continue into 2023. So that means, again, I don't want anyone to be lured into that Trojan horse happiness that, oh, you know, we don't hear any more news and therefore it is okay and it's done. Okay, so if you are like me and I have not kept up with events in India, I was very surprised to see this. So this was an article that was posted last year. And apparently it says here that there is a rising homecoming campaign that is aimed at returning non-Hindus into the Hindu fold and creating what is known right now as Hindu Rashtra or Hindu state. And you can see here, India is actually majority Hindu. I think we know that. Muslims make up 14% and Christians are just 2%. And it says here also that the senior officials have brushed aside any assertion that the ruling party was driving a wedge between religious groups. I think there are other articles coming out about nationalism and so on and so forth. And I think for a lot of us, it's really to think about why should you care? Because this affects regular people. Even if you have no connection to politics and you really frankly don't care about what these things that they're talking about, but down to the average person, I think one of the patterns that we really must combat as a community is that over the last 10, 20 years, a lot of communities have learned how to live with each other. And I think there's a lot of respect for what people believe. And in lots of countries, not just countries like in Singapore where I live in, a lot of people have learned to religious and racial tolerance. And what I worry here is that a lot of these cracks are starting to create problems. And that's why it's very important for people to reinforce that and make sure that this does not create distrust and divisions between people, because I don't think anybody wants that, honestly. People on the ground who are not involved in all of this. Okay, so I want to move on to chapter 5, okay, which is then you, okay, how will your life be affected? So now I'm going to go away from the politics already, okay, and we're going to talk now about something a little bit more practical, okay, and it's down to, now, first of all, okay, when I'm showing you this air era timeline again, because another theme that I've been talking about since I started with the webinars is that we have to learn to be more minimalist. Don't buy so many things. And we start to realize that I think I covered this a bit, and I'm not really sure if people fully understood what I was trying to tell them, that you want to start fostering a lifestyle where you are not so focused on things. Okay, now the reason is very simple, and I'm now going to go to China. Now, one of the, if you've been following economic news, China ran into an energy crisis this year. And it says they need more coal to avert the crisis. Some of you know the story between them and Australia. Go do your own research, right? But the important thing is that when the energy crisis happened, it meant that China underwent multiple rounds of blackouts and a lot of factories were down. Production was down. So now for an average person, don't care which country you're from, just so you know, everything is made in China, yeah? So that when you have some shipments will definitely be delayed. Think about the implications of that. And they're also saying that we are thinking of renting or building new factories somewhere outside of China. Okay, so think about the implications of this and how it will change the way all of us work and how supply chains are going to be affected in the entire world. Now, it says here also that other players in the supply chains will move at least some part of production outside of the usual China, and even customers like Apple, Google, HP, Dell, they need something a bit more resilient than a supply chain in China. So pause and think about, lots of you work for or have businesses that are directly connected to a lot of these companies. So let me show you what is causing this. So the number 2 house is, again, I told you it's about money and resources, and Neptune was here. So Neptune is when things disappear. So when a lot of resources, the resource you need wasn't there. So that's called disappearing resources. Started as early, ramping up from about April this year. So it's been going on all year. And look for the end date, yeah? The end date is not 2022. It's not Jan 2022, it's Jan 2023. So which means that we are only just seeing the beginning of these disappearing resources. So that missing money, possessions, resources, loss of value, but also those of you who have been following other news, which I'll get to later, is about making their dollars intangible. Okay, and this becomes strong in the last part of the upcoming year. Okay, so disappearing resources. And what's more is this pattern here where I call this contractual endings. So just now you saw with the PowerPoint slide that a lot of people who are doing business in China, they're sort of rethinking, do I still want to relocate myself there? So this has already started, and that's why they've started leaving, right? So that means from July onwards, in the last half a year or so, it's been happening. There are what I call rogue behavior in communication and words. And by this, I don't mean that they are going on Twitter and yelling at people, yeah? This rogue behavior can also mean that the agreement that we had, the words that we had said, now we changed the interpretation. And it could come across as irresponsibility. You said you were going to do this and then you never do. So it could be an abrupt death when it comes to certain contracts and agreements. Things that were supposed to be a 10-year contract that suddenly end. Okay, so these things can happen. These contracts can be economical contracts or it can also be political contracts, but I'm not going to go into the politics here. So can this also mean that it's the rise of digital technology? China is already the front leader there. Now, this placement tells you that in this period, now, China has gone even further. Some of you have been following, you know what I'm talking about. So there are 2 strong periods. The first one has already happened just a few months ago. And the next one is coming up at the beginning of 2023. Okay, so that not so soon, following year. Now the thing is, let me show you the scale of what do I mean by they are leaving China. Okay, let me show you the logos of the companies that are leaving. See if you can spot a pattern, yeah? Watch, Nike, Adidas, Puma, Under Armour, Steve Madden, Old Navy, Superdry, Space, NK. This is just some of the companies, yeah? See if you can figure out like what is the common denominator here, okay? So go ask yourself, what industry is this? Okay, pay attention first. Let's look at Apple, Dell, HP, Intel. All these companies are leaving their factories away from China. Okay, then that's another industry, yeah? Okay, be careful. I don't mean IT. Look carefully. It's not IT. It's something called electronics. Okay, and the first category are things like apparel, and a lot of these clothes and shoes and consumer goods. And then this section here is a little bit more IT, but you also want to notice that they are not exactly the latest IT companies, if you know what I mean. They are a bit long ago kind of IT companies, just saying. Okay, and then we also have car companies like Hyundai and Kia. So what I want to I just want, there are a couple more that are not in any category. Now, the thing is, look carefully here. And sometimes you might be thinking, oh no, is China going to go into a bad place because these guys are leaving? But you see, I've educated you about what the Earth era and what the Air era is. And if you look carefully, almost everything here is part of the Earth era. And even the guys from the second category, don't they make up your fridge, your washing machine, your laptop, your phone, your whatever? And guys, you know that stuff is Earth era stuff. If you look carefully at the technology that's coming, you may not need those things already. Okay, and even when it comes down to the first category about the apparel, I kind of warned people from about 2 years ago that that industry is a bit bye-bye already. Now, if you look at this entire set of logos here, some of the world's biggest companies are here. And if they are exiting China, but you see, some people are also noticing that China is not exactly panicking. Okay, so let me get to that. So on the timeline, you can see that a lot of these patterns are not new. They have been running since this year. And eventually, so a lot of these people are threatening to leave. And then by about June, you see like all these contractual endings will start to happen. And with a large highlight here somewhere in September. And even for all these areas here, some of the headlines that you see around this period is that, oh, China is losing this, China is losing that. That's exactly what you will notice. But the big question I want to ask you is this. How come China is not exactly panicking? Okay, now, if China no longer wants to be the world's factory, who will take its place? And the thing is, what I want you to notice is that if you look at this picture, and you see like China used to be characterized by pictures like this, low-wage, low-income workers, skilled only in manufacturing, and then they will make all the cheap stuff. So the entire world went there to sign all these cheap contracts and try to do things for like low price. Now, the good news is that for China, if you look at young people, millennials, Gen Z, China's got lots of those very smart guys right now. Do they look like the kind of guy who works in factories? Ask yourself, guys. Think, what are all these young Chinese, well-educated, rich kids, what are they doing? Not factory work, they're doing something else. And what this also means is that when all these people with their low, cheap, like low profit kind of contracts are leaving China, what this means is, here's my suggestion, you go and verify with a business consultant whether I'm correct, that China is essentially changing their business model. That they don't want to deal with these guys, right? And they can stay in the air era, China is going, they can stay in the earth era, China is going to the air era. And what I see here is this combination here, the 3 and 9, is the change of mindset. And what I see very clearly in China's chart is that from 2023 onwards, starting from middle part of the year, we start to see them go full force into what I call unconventional money and values. It will be a digital approach to money and banking. Some of you know what I'm talking about, a lot of new technology coming up, and it will change the domestic, the landscape of China. And it will, and during that time, think about it, 2023 is when a lot of countries are in trouble. There are lots and lots of trouble in 2023, and China will have a very creative solution to solve those international problems. And this will become strong. Look at the dates. Just around the time when a lot of countries, just after a lot of countries are in like major problems, okay? So, so the pattern will extend all the way until 2024, but it begins in May of 2023. Now, the thing is now, as China is moving, I think I think everybody needs to pay a lot more attention and do your own research. Okay, I cannot do everything. I do a lot for you already. But you have to go and look at certain new developments. I'm about to show you that you might want to study a few things. China has introduced something called a social credit. I can't remember which city, I think it's Hangzhou or somewhere. They have a very unconventional approach to money. So you go do your research. Now, another thing that they are going to introduce is something called a digital yuan. And the digital yuan is like having cash, but just that it is in your phone, it is a digital thing. Now, in China, it's called digital yuan. In many other countries, they are looking at something very big. And I've spoken to lots of people. And this is the interesting part. To prepare for this webinar, I did so extensive research. I spoke to finance people. I spoke to bank people, and I asked them about something that I uncovered on the internet. Now, I consider myself very savvy, I thought I know a lot of things, but I discovered something quite new to me very recently called a CBDC. It's a central bank digital currency. And when I spoke to a lot of people in banks, it seemed like it shocked me that a lot of people had never heard of it. Okay, so go do your own research. I will not do this, but I thought it was very interesting when I saw this article online that says China declares cryptocurrencies transactions illegal as the digital yuan is nearing. The digital yuan is their version of the CBDC, and I think for a lot of people who are very involved in very exciting new developments, I think you want to think very, very, very clearly about the implications of a lot of these new things that are coming up. And as I tell you, the world will change very rapidly in 2023. And I also showed you right at the very beginning of this webinar that the inventions that will change the world. Remember the overlapping period? It will start in 2025. So if the things that will transform the world, that will change everything in our lifestyles, have not been born yet. They will only be born in 2025, and that is the reason why you want to be extremely careful about going into things that are very new. It may go in a very unpredictable way. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say on the subject. Okay, so but the thing is, what's important here, guys? Stuff is going to get seriously expensive next year. I've been saying for the last 2 years, like, don't need to have so many clothes, yeah? So just saying, Now, here are some of the headlines that I've gotten. These are the ones that have already happened, and which obviously I cannot show you headlines of things that are not going to happen yet, but these things should give you a good idea of what to expect in the next 2 years. First of all, there's a global chip shortage, and it's a nightmare before Christmas. Basically, all your PlayStation, all your like fantastic mobile phones, you want to reconsider because shortage means the price goes up. Now, how many of you actually work in electronics and all these tech industries? Is it true, guys? Is there a massive global chip shortage? Look at that, right? Dell, HP, Lenovo, they say that they will pass on the higher cost to the consumer. And IBM says the chip shortage could last 2 years. And also Xiaomi says that the chip shortage has increased costs and they may pass it on to you, i.e. higher prices. Now, Intel CEO has warned the chip shortage won't end until at least 2023, and the laptop sales are going to get hurt by supply issues. Now, as if it's not enough that a lot of communications is going to get restricted in the upcoming year, but it could mean that you might not be able to get your hand on some of these devices. Okay, so that means, guys, keep thinking about implications. Okay, you come to a webinar like this, I'm telling you this stuff beforehand. Think. Okay, and Apple is going to cut their iPhone production goals. And guys, look at the date of this article. Not very long ago, just last month. Okay, so that means don't need to rush to best denki now, okay? But the thing is, you probably want to go get some laptops and phones while they are still available, okay? And the global chip shortage could affect gadget prices in 2022. Samsung and their folding phone, not really sure how that's going to affect them also. Now, the funny thing here is that if you think about what is really lacking right now is something called the silicon shortage. And I don't want you to just limit yourself to just phones and laptops. I want you to consider that because of the smart home revolution, a lot of people have got little computers in their washing machine. They have computers in their fridge, in their aircon sometimes. And also in your cars, there are lots and lots of things. I'm sure you can come up with an unending list of things that got little computers inside, and they all need that little chip that's inside. So guys, what does this mean? It's all going to get expensive. It's all going to be hard to replace. I think it's possible that you have to be prepared that prices are going to shoot. All right, so the thing is, now the silicon shortage, now I'm going to show you something, right? I found online, this is irrelevant, but I thought it was quite interesting because I was quite curious as to, wow, what happened to all the chips here? And I actually found this, the cost of silicon has risen substantially due to the mass production of the COVID-19 vaccines because the material that is required to make the vials is the same as the silicon that is used to manufacture the chip inside the personal computer. So I see, the thing is, guys, don't say that something that affects one industry is not my problem, because then something that affects medicine and health is now the problem of the IT industry. Okay, so guys, don't say that things are divided. It is not. We are all interconnected. Okay. Doesn't stop there. Now, not everything is China's fault. Okay, but clothes. We all love our just-in-time fashion, cheap, right? And it says here that your just-in-time fashion will neither be cheap nor in time anymore. Okay, so that clothes are going to become expensive. Next one is going to pain a lot of people, coffee. is also having a coffee shortage, and it could last for 3 years. This one is not China's fault. There are a few coffee producing countries that have experienced a lot of production delays. So your coffee is not going to be there. Okay, another one is, this picture is about the fertilizers. Okay, and the thing about the energy shortage is that it affects not just meat production, meat processing, it also affects fertilizers, and therefore, very recently, look, that's November 4th, that's just 2 weeks ago, that at COP26, Yara CEO have said, I'm afraid we are going to have a food crisis. So what this means is that in terms of your expenditures, and I think it's very interesting because as we move from the earth to the air era, one of the things that people have to let go of is this attachment to things. The air era is very intangible in many ways. And I know we've all been brought up in this materialistic environment where if you're successful means you have lots of stuff, right? And the thing is, it's quite hard to own stuff when you can't buy it. Okay, so the thing is, I think people need to, you want to be very prepared. Like, it's not going to happen all at one go, but I think if people who have kids, people who have families, you lead teams, I think it's time to start planning for how can you do a lot of things with very little resources. And the good news is that it forces people to be more innovative. It forces a lot of people who are in manufacturing to be a lot more productive. Okay, so now this brings me to Singapore. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this, right? I did a lot of research. So I did my calculations for Singapore. Usually I do my calculations first, and then I look for the headlines that will help us to understand what is going on. And I have to confess, I had a very different experience with Singapore than with all the other countries that I studied. Because there's the obvious COVID update, so I'm not going to bother with the COVID updates. And but you see, it was very hard for me to find other information. And let me show you what I found over and over again. It's unlike other countries, for Singapore, the headlines look like this. Families are flocking to hotels for staycation right in the middle of a COVID crisis. And then there are other things like cruise, right? So that's the headline, like cruise to nowhere, Genting Cruises gets more than 6,000 bookings in 5 days. Singapore's situation seems to be very different from everybody else. And I was just watching the news yesterday, and apparently the airport has just opened something new. People are queuing up to buy $600 tickets to Kuala Lumpur. So the thing is, and we also see other things, like for example, like people are still buying cars, even though, and I personally know people who only drive twice a week now because they don't go to the office anymore, but they're still buying cars. So I think to all the people who live in Singapore, whether the shortage hits you or not, okay, because it does help that some people live in very, very wealthy countries. But I think it's time to be prepared, because just because something does not hit you immediately does not mean it is not going to hit you. And I think for a lot of people who are living in a bubble, or they are living in a cotton wool kind of environment, it can mean, now if you live in Singapore and if some of the things that I've shared today is a shock and a surprise to you, with hey, how come I don't know this? Please really consider that you might not be getting a full range of information from your usual diet of information. So that means, this is why I cannot emphasize, please pay attention to what's happening elsewhere. Because by the time it hits you, it might be a bit too late for you to make an adjustment. Please understand what's happening in the rest of the world, even if you yourself are not hit by it. So now in Singapore, what happened was, in the whole of 2021, I call it COVID cramping your style, and what we experienced was a half restriction on travel. So it was like, it was kind of open, but then it wasn't really open. And then also things like a lot of like laws, legal systems, it seemed like there were restrictions, and then there was like half restrictions, if you know what I mean. Also things like events, recreational activities, that there was an opening, but it was like half opening, wasn't really full. So what a lot of people were grappling with in 2021 was this thing about COVID. But notice that the end date is the 1st of December. Today is already the 20th of November, which means that, is COVID going to continue cramping your style? Good news is, I think no. So that means if a lot of people are looking for the recovery of the post-pandemic, I think you're going to be happy for a while. Okay, so that means that seems likely. Okay, so things are going to be okay for a while. but patterns are still going to show up. So what happened last year was also it's a pattern of these like laws becoming somewhat uncertain, ambiguous. So some things that it affected were things like travel. So like there were certain corridors that were going to open, and then after that they renegotiated. So that was uncertain. Also things like certain laws that have come up might have been quite unclear as to does it cover what or this and that. Also, it affects things like travel, foreigners, journalism, broadcasting. Most of the new requirements are a bit grey on those things. So when it comes down to about May to July, that was when it was strong this year. Now, in the upcoming years, we look at a few other countries. And as I said, when things are affecting the fourth house, this number 4 here, and Pluto can be, there are some indicators of control. And I would call this some guidelines for mass communication. This also starts to build up from about 3rd of February onwards. That's in a few weeks' time. That you might notice that you're probably going to be informed that more topics will be inappropriate for open discussion. And it will start to ramp up much more strongly in 2023. Okay, and other patterns will show up more this year, in the middle of this year, that you are going to see possibly a discussion on how some of our public or our shared resources will be handled. So as I said earlier, for a country's shared resources, there are all those things that I mentioned earlier, that it could generate a lot of mass discussion in the communities among the people. And the conversation might come in the sense of like, oh, I'm not really sure what this means, and I would like to clarify, and I would like to get more information about why this is so. Okay, so that's how it's going to be. So if you put all of these out together, you can see like the bit of uncertainty in the laws. There can be some guidelines as to what can be discussed and what may not be so appropriate. And then by about May, that's when, so the laws come first. Basically, the laws about what you can discuss will come first in February, and then after that, new discussions will be introduced in April. And then in the middle of the year, now this opposition here will usually cover things like money, shared resources, and if this issue is not resolved, you'll find that what really comes out here is that a lot of attention will be placed onto leaders and communities. Okay, so the first thing is that if you look at in May, it's what I describe as a surprise development when it comes to money and shared resources. Now, the reason is because the planet here, this blue planet, is known as Uranus, and it can cause unprecedented or unpredictable changes. So this is when it will start to affect how money is being handled in the country. So surprise events, it can involve things like money, currency, tax money, your banks, etc. And because if it's Neptune in the 2nd house, there can be some boundaries. Remember I said Neptune is when things are not clear. So when it comes to things like income and expenditures, and this can also involve some appreciation, recognition for groups and leaders. So, and this will also affect a lot of the future plans that Singapore will have. So if you pay attention to the media and all the discussions on the ground in the middle of the year, some of those discussions may change the direction in how Singapore will develop from here onwards. Then on top of that, you'll see that, of course, then once the new guidelines are being put out, there will be a lot of opinions that will come from the working class. So that also occurs around the same time from about May onwards. So the discussion will revolve around topics including things like leaders, money, and boundaries. And also, the assertive opinions will start to show up more in broadcasting and discourse. That will be strong in the 3rd quarter of 2022. And after that, now when you have Saturn in the 5th house, the 5th is for expression. And Saturn can sometimes mean that people are not fully able to access a full range of expression. It will affect, sometimes anything that affects the moon affects the people, affects emotions. So there could be some of these restrictions to personal lives, emotional expression. There will be a lot of rules in order to take care of the people in times of crisis, and the world is a bit messy in other places, that there will be new rules that will take care of the people on the ground. It will affect a lot of people's lives. And that's why on the ground, you'll find that a lot of people will not be so open to some of these suggestions. Okay, so that you will have to decide how you are going to adjust. And therefore, and I also want to talk about the people who like to speculate in real estate. This placement is not great for that kind of thing. So generally and I think one of the possibilities is because if I'm correct about what's happening in the US, if property prices start running like crazy, it might be necessary for your sake that that real estate needs to be controlled a little bit, right? Otherwise, it's not good news for Singapore also. Then, so this is going to be strong in the middle part of the year. And so if we put out, there are different types of surprise developments. So I just put both dates there. And you can see, whoa, right? So basically, I think those of you who attended my webinars before, you know, when things stack up is when stuff happens, right? So this year, everything stacked up in October, and then you saw like, you know, situation was bad in October, okay? So that means in May next year, you should see a flurry of activity here in Singapore. New beginnings, as you can see here. Now, if I were to take one more, okay, just now I said that your activities will open up and there will be more, you'll be less restricted by COVID. At least in the near future. However, I also see something that you should probably take note of. People who think that you're going to open up your activities and you're going to fly all over the world and that you're going to have events, might want to think again, right? So, and this time round, the culprit is not COVID-19. So the issue here is that we have Mars here in the number 9 house. So it seems that there's some activity going on. The 9th house can refer to the international situation. Now, if I'm correct about what's happening in other countries, it's quite possible that to protect you and for your sake, you may not be encouraged to fly all over the place. And also that if you're expecting a lot of your friends from other countries to be able to freely come and visit you, that might prove to be have some obstacles there. So that means we are going to see from September onwards, this should not come as a surprise to you because other countries got a lot of things happening from September onwards, that there will be a slowdown in things like travel, events, and economy. That so all of these things will happen, and probably due to international reasons rather than domestic reasons, right? It's not because of here, it's because of other place. Okay, and I'm just going to stick this in. There are a lot of other little small ones I got no time to cover, but that's not important for now. Okay, but so you will see that in about September, October is when I believe that there's going to be guidelines for sure, right? That there are certain things that you are probably not going to, it's not going to be so easy for you to do. Okay, and of course, if you want to pay attention, if you want to, you can sort of plan a little bit for like December and this period. I just don't want to highlight so many because it will feel quite overwhelming. But I think if you can plan until the 3rd quarter here, where if those of you are planning events and stuff, I think what I've just shared with you is quite valuable, yeah? So be prepared that I've started warning people since 2019, when in January when I did my first public event, that don't just wait for COVID to end. I said it multiple times, right? If all you are doing is like, oh, when COVID ends, then things will improve, I think people have not heard what I'm saying in the webinars. Okay, so that's super important. Now I'm going to summarize. I'm going to spend the last half hour talking about, now that I've given you quite a shitty picture of what's happening in the second wave, I think it's important to sort of regroup. Okay, and to really look at the themes of what we are dealing with. And that's why on the ground, when you are a business owner, when you are a key decision maker, and a lot of you, even if you are not in that category, there are people that you are leading. There are projects that you can begin right now that will help you to adjust. Even if you are not interested in all these things that's happening in other parts of the world, that surely as we move from the earth to the air era, there's some changes that people need to make into our personal lifestyles and also how we do our jobs, because ultimately life has to go on. So if we look at this second wave that's happening in 2022 to 2023, now the first thing is that a lot of countries will change. That means some places that you have always thought of as a fantastic holiday destination, or that you were always going to be able to get your product from this country or whatever, I think you have to accept and start to see how the relationship is going to change because of the events that are going to happen. So you want to make plans that will account for the fact that certain contracts may not be able to sustain as long as you think they are going to. Now, another one is that Another pattern that has been repeated throughout all my calculations, and it's not just the countries that I've chosen to show you. I have no time. I didn't have time to cover Australia. I didn't have time to cover Thailand, and God knows how many other countries. So this pattern of a restricted opinion and communications is clear across multiple countries. And that's why and while this may be for political reasons or whatever it is, but ultimately people's life need to continue. You still need to talk to your friends, you still need to talk to your team, we still need to work, right, guys? So that means you want to start exploring, okay, are there ways in which people can still, we need to keep that communication going, right? Is that if people stop talking to each other, all we have is isolation, and on top of that, it's going to promote even more distrust when you cannot talk to people. Who agrees with me, right? So that means that's something that we definitely have to work on like now, okay? And also I think when there's a lot of events that's happening in the world, and when people get emo, and I think sometimes when you can't get your laptops and stuff, then you even more emo, right? So that's when we want to be very mindful of ourselves and how we are reacting to things. Don't get crazy and don't get irrational, because that doesn't help anybody. And I think we want to be able to see that what is happening in the world that could potentially cause divides. And I would like to suggest for all of us, myself included, that we need to spend more efforts connecting with people so that we don't let these divisions get in the way of the important work that we all need to do. Okay, and on top of that, let's not mince words here. There will be shortages. The fact that all these CEOs are coming out to tell you that, oh, they're not telling you about their new product, no, they're telling you that there's going to be a shortage, okay? So you know they're telling you the truth. And like I told you, sometimes they like to wait until the last moment when you cannot react already, then they tell you, okay? So by the time it hits the headlines, you know it's the truth already. So the thing is, shortages are a thing. And which means, I know Christmas is coming up, I know Chinese New Year is coming up. I think it's just a matter of people really changing their minds about when we celebrate things, when we want to reward people. Is it always about things, or is it time to really change our values from the earth era to the air era? And are there much more meaningful ways of showing appreciation for people? Perhaps a phone call is something that is so much more valuable than getting a nice thing to display in your house. It's just going to collect dust, right? So that's when really reconsider how we do even the simplest and the smallest of things. Okay, shortages are a thing in 2022, 2023. Now, here's the thing. I think a lot of these shortages, a lot of people are going to think it's temporary. People thought that all the COVID measures were temporary. People thought that working from home was temporary. I've been saying this right from the very start. Please don't be lulled into this temporary thinking. In 1971, when Richard Nixon first said he was taking USD off the gold standard, he also said it was temporary. It's been 40 years already. Okay, so be critical, exercise critical thinking when you hear the word temporary. Okay, and so the shortages are a thing. Now, what's, I think, the biggest effect on all of us from a low down level here is that a lot of people were hoping for a recovery. They were thinking that, okay, we were just waiting for COVID to pass. And I've said multiple times, so what if COVID passes? And I said that this is not like the other depressions. It's going to be one in which it doesn't ever come up. Okay, so that means the first thing you want to do is to understand that. And that's why I definitely want to spend this last part of my webinar. If you ask me, this last part is the most important part, which is who cares about all this stuff that's happening in the world? It will happen whether you come to this webinar or not, it will still happen, right? But the difference that your time in this webinar is going to make that difference to you is this last part, which is what are you going to do about it? And the question is, what's your plan? And I'm going to make a few suggestions. Okay, I'm going to repeat a few things that I said before, but I think now it's going to be much clearer to the people who fully understand what I'm trying to say. Now, for a lot of people, there is no plan. Okay, because if you look at like headlines like this, now the Great Resignation, now you would think that people will be grabbing and holding on to their jobs right now. But the funny thing is, lots and lots of people are actually leaving their jobs. And what's interesting, I saw a survey that was done in my country, in Singapore, when they surveyed people, up to 46%, half of the people actually said that I have either quit my job or I'm intending to quit in the next 1 year. So if you would think that with a crisis, that crisis mentality, shouldn't people be grabbing onto their jobs? But they're not. They're leaving. And the funny thing is a lot of these people are not leaving to a higher paying job. The funny thing is more and more people are actually leaving without a plan. And while that sounds like a terrible thing, now I'm going to suggest that it is a good thing. Okay, let me go on further. Okay, with this resignation, this is an air era response to all the nonsense that's happening in the world. Now, it's not just employees. If you look at SME owners, we talk about great digital reset. But I've done these webinars for almost 2 years now already. And me and my team have been very actively talking to people of various industries to understand what the hell is going on. And a lot of these SME owners telling us that we really feel like we want to pivot. We want to do something else. And it doesn't mean that they were losing money. A lot of these people were actually making money in the Earth era. But a lot of these guys they're very aware of what's happening. And they feel like, I don't mind even changing the industry that I'm in. I can see some people are very candid with me. They tell me, I don't see a future in my industry. I'm actively thinking, how do I get my team to switch our attention into something else totally different? Okay, so what I'm going to suggest here, okay, is a lot of people tell me I don't really have a plan and I don't really know why. Now, a lot of these people, they're not stupid people, they're educated, very go-getter people. But the thing is that they just feel like they want to stop. Sometimes it's a bit like, hey, it doesn't work already. Then rather than you just anyhow do things, how about we just take a pause and we look at where all of us are. We are all of us at that red arrow right at the beginning of the air era. Now, if nobody has the answers, it's because nobody has the answers. Right? And that's why these people feel like we should just pause and then think about what we are going to create from here. Because unlike a lot of other people in history, we have the privilege of being among the people who get to decide what this air era is going to be like. Now, who seriously, I mean, I don't know if you people can respond, but who agrees with me? I mean, if you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand. If you're on Facebook Live, you can say something. Now, who agrees with me that it comes to a point where if we just keep doing, right, you're not even sure where you're rushing to already. That means we just take a pause, okay? And for a lot of people who, I'm going to share something, and it's just my suggestion on what do we mean by a lot of these businesses that can move into the air era. And I generated this list from extensive research and literally talking to just random people on the ground. And these are the things that I've seen over and over again. Because I have seen who are the people who are dying and who are failing, which companies are like, you look at it, you face palm already. And then there are companies when you look at them and you know in your heart that this is the excitement, this is the future. And I'm going to show you what I mean here. And we can do this together, okay? Now, as I'm showing you, after I'm done showing you all the examples, I want you to think about what is the common denominator across all these examples. Because if you can understand the common denominator, then you know exactly how you are going to plan. Okay, so let me get started, okay? By the way, it's not exhaustive list, means y'all don't be silly, don't just limit yourself here. There's many other industries, yeah? Now, the first one is that you look at a lot of these YouTubers, and I'm not talking about the ones who are doing just entertainment. There are lots of people who are sharing their analysis. They're from various industries. Look, I am sharing my analysis with you guys like that, my expert analysis. And I think it's coming from a space of awareness. That means if a lot of the conventional mediums are not giving people the information, we kind of need to get creative. We need to go and show people what else is out there. And of course, there are also people who go into what I call production. And in case you say, hey, May, I mean, isn't this so Earth era? I don't think so, okay? Because what I'm trying to show you here is that now, if there's going to be shortages in the world, look among yourself. You are all professionals. Many of you have expertise in making things, producing food, manufacturing. And what I'm trying to suggest here is that now, is there a better way to manufacture things? Because we still need cameras, right? We still need tables and chairs and cups, right? You know what I mean? So the thing is, somebody has to make this stuff. And can you now find new ways to apply your expertise? Make it sustainable. Make people don't waste all this material. You know how we buy all that crap every year and then we just dump it every time? Seriously, why? So let's build more quality stuff. Get together with people. Now, another group is, I think mental and emotional health is going to be a major problem in the upcoming years. I hope you all agree with me. It's already a problem. And there are many of you here who are coaches, psychologists, even teachers who want to do more than just teach. So which is, finding ways to sort of connect back to the people, and you're not limited to the people who are in your country. That's what the internet is for. There are multiple other countries that really need that support. And is this the time for the psychologists and the counselors and the coaches to really step up, right? And don't limit yourself to 10 people, okay? And of course, there are also people who create beauty, who create art. And of course, when the world isn't giving you very good news, I think sometimes a good piece of music, somebody who's drawn beautiful pictures, who really can show people that, hey, look, there's still beauty in the world. I think there's a lot of value in this. Now, another group of people are those who are in health and wellness. And I'm not just talking about people who cannot go to the gym, then we just do yoga at home. That one is very superficial. Now, I want to point out the fact that if there's going to be food shortages in the world, please pause and think. Do you think there's going to be a nutrition problem in the world? I think so. I think there's going to be a very big nutrition problem. And for the people who are, if you are from a rich country, good for you. But there are lots and lots of people who aren't going to have that privilege. And then, so the thing is, and don't assume that everyone is going to be well fed, and don't assume that everyone's going to have everything. So in terms of exercise, getting people to be well, okay, so this is very, very important. And also education, where education has changed. It is not just what we learn in school. I think we all agree on that. That I think a lot of people have skills. You have professional skills that can be applied in multiple different ways. And I think people have to really find ways to connect to that. Okay, so these are just some examples, and many of you are from a myriad of professions. The list goes on. Okay, but now we get to the important part. Who cares about this? You don't have to pick one. That's not what I'm saying. But look at the common denominator. And for those of you who are taking notes, here's what I'm going to share. Now, the first of the common denominators is that none of these people are doing this on their own. There is a whole team behind them. The YouTuber isn't a one-man show. There is a whole team of people behind them. And you know how I know this? Because 7 people had to work very hard to make this webinar a reality. It's not just me, Sim. You think I know how to set up the camera? You think I know how to set all these lights? And I didn't do the Facebook ads that brought you here. It wasn't. 7 people had to work to make this webinar happen. So get together with your groups. It doesn't have to be a gigantic MNC. It just needs a few people who believe in the same cause. Now, the second common denominator is that this business does not come because your boss or your company asks you to do. The common denominator is it comes from you. If a psychologist or a counselor decides to reach out to the people who need help, it's because they wanted to do it, not because the hospital asked them to do it. So the thing is, that's when people can go away from feeling like you are coerced or you are restricted and then you're forced to do things just because your job or your salary demands it. Something special happens when people do it of their own accord. And the last common denominator is that none of these people have to go through an official channel. You don't have to convince someone to publish you anymore. You don't have to convince the broadcasting corporation to feature your whatever. YouTube, just upload. Right? And the thing is, what the common denominator is, go and present what you have directly to the people who need it. Don't go through all the complicated channels really. All those complicated supply chains is what is creating the shortages in the world right now. In the air era, forget about all these things. Go straight to the persons who need it. And that's how we can use technology to our advantage. Right? I hope you all have found this very useful. Now, the thing is, now how are we going to get this done? Especially for a lot of people who are new to my webinars, and you're hearing this for the first time, and this is such a shock to you, especially if you've always been in that very structured, listen to your boss kind of environment. Now, the thing is to me, it's a simple 4-step process. I'm going to just share this. And this, you don't have to go to anyone. You can do this by yourself at home. Don't have to pay a cent, okay? Now, the first thing that you have to decide is that you need to choose a new direction. Understanding what you know of the air era, then what I'm suggesting is come from a contribution space. If you look at all those examples I shared earlier, none of those people were doing it because, oh, this new business is going to make us $1 million. That's not why they did it. They did it because there's a need in the world and they're just solving a problem. So if you come from that contribution space, what then, if you could choose a brand new direction, what would it be? And the second one is that you need to connect. Much as connections could be challenging, but you need to decide. That's why decide now. Who do you want to work with? unlike in the past when you were given a team, then whether you like the guy, don't like the guy, you just have to find a way to work with him. But now, because there's that freedom of deciding, you can literally reach out to someone and say, hey, I've got this idea and I really want to do this, but I don't know how to do this part. Can you help me? Let's form a team. Sometimes it's that simple. You know, you have thousands of your WhatsApp messages and stuff. How many of your messages are really trying to get something productive going? So think about that. Now, the third point is that you can now design a new culture. Because if we are going away from all those gigantic corporations and stuff, and that means if you thought that KPIs was kind of good but not entirely good, design your own. And if you decided that people don't have to go through multiple layers of approval, when your team is only 5 to 7 people, don't worry, there are no multiple layers. Everyone just needs to agree. Everyone just needs to know what they need to do. Okay, and this is where this new culture is shocking for some people, but for the people who have already done it, you know, if you had a taste of this kind of working, it is the power teams. It is the, you know, last time we had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Power Rangers, and I think it's a story that came out from the Air era that inspired a lot of people. That if you have 5 to 10 people, 20 people who come together to share their expertise with each other, there's a lot of stuff that people can do, and you'll be surprised just how powerful people are. 7 people put this webinar together. Okay, and also, then the next step is don't just plan, don't just have a dream. Then that's when we kind of have to work bloody hard for the people that we want to serve. It means everyone has to work hard. And I think you come from a bit of an entrepreneurial, or what I like to call an immigrant kind of perspective. And a lot of us come from immigrant backgrounds. At some point, one of your great-grandfather or somewhere came from some country and landed in the country where you are right now. And the thing is, when you come from that perspective, you realize that the people who are new are facing a new space. And that means, don't you realize that this is exactly what they do? They choose a new direction, they decide who they want to work with, they design a new culture, and before you know it, they've created a new world. Okay, and this is very, very important to do, because I've spoken at length about this in other webinars, and that a lot of the earth structures, anything that rose during the earth era will also die together with the earth era. And for some people, it's very uncomfortable to hear that there is things like some of these MNCs that came up during the earth era. Some of the stock market was born, Wall Street was born when the earth era began. And go look at my other webinars and I'll explain it. But a lot of the Olympics, for example, went up, and you know, Olympics is like already, right? So the thing is, understand that a lot of these things are going to change, and we have to learn to find ways to work with each other in a much smaller context. All right, so my belief here is that earlier I showed this quote: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And as free speech came up, what we saw earlier was that there's a clampdown. But at the same time, what I want to explain here is that if we look at these oppositions here, I think it's important for people to decide here and now that if we are going to be the people who bring that air era into existence, the decisions that each person collectively makes right now gets to decide whether or not which way we are going. And I think if we don't do anything, and if we just stay silent, we just go on life as per normal, essentially what you are going to get is the one that's on the right. A lot of the events that are happening will sort of end up in that direction. And I think that for the people who actually do care about what's happening on the left, we might need to take a bit of effort. You need to get to the people who believe in that. Otherwise, if everybody just wants to be a sheeple, we might just end up with the one that's on the right. So my view is, in the next few years, it's possible that we may have to fight for the right to be yourself. And so the thing is, I think for the people who already have a team, if you already know the people you want to work with, you can't, when you quit your job, you already knew that there was a direction you wanted to go into, then get started. Right? Basically, you can skip everything and go straight to number 4. And if you ask me, 加油, just keep going. Right? And I built my team, and we've been actively adding on to that. We've been inspired by even the results that we have gotten. And I tell you, those people who have taken this direction, they are excited, and they know that there's a lot of work to be done. But I think also for a lot of people, I'm also mindful. I've done this for 2 years now. Lots and lots of people have gotten in touch with us. And I'm very well aware that for some people, even step 1 is difficult. I tell people, blank slate, choose a new direction. They cannot already. at this point, they already lost already. And when you cannot find the first direction, then how to decide who you want to work with and how to decide what culture you want. So what I have done, okay, so everybody knows that I am an astrologer. I teach astrology. I don't know how to help you with finances or economics. I don't know any of that stuff. The one thing I do know is astrology. And over the last 2 years, we've done this in all our webinars, that we've offered something to people. And the only tool that we know is astrology. And although today what I've done is world astrology, we look at companies, we look at countries. But now, as we zoom down to the exact individual, then what we are looking at is, can astrology be applied to an individual? And I think yes. If you have 5, 7 people in a team, then what each person does becomes of prime and profound importance. So we have changed this program as we go along, based on the feedback we've gotten from participants throughout, and we have actually gone and made a very big change to our program. So what we are going to do here, we've actually introduced a new teamwork component into the astrology program. So instead of just learning the astrology, applying to yourself, figure out what you're going to do, we're going to get people to work in teams so that you get a taste of what is it like to create a new reality and to see that, wow, I mean, you mean these 4 people can potentially do something like that? And if you actually wanted to try out after the course, go ahead. So we call this connect, contribute, and change. And I think is going to keep it as simple as possible. Now, when we talk about your value in the air era, this is what some people used to call the career profile. And we decided not to use that because even for us in the team, we realized that career is a bit of an earth era word. And as long as we keep the word career around, people keep thinking that, oh, if I know my career profile, I can go apply for a job somewhere. The question I want to ask is, where exactly do you want to apply for a job? Okay, so even if it doesn't happen this year or next year, I think that the robots are being made right now. So the reality is, in terms of this applying for a job, the faster we change that mentality, the faster we're going to adapt. And I sincerely hope you agree with me. So in terms of the objectives of what are we trying to do? Number one, to get you to connect with other like-minded people. Based on the feedback that many people said that, yeah, even if I want to adapt, but the people around me are very earth era. I try to give a suggestion to my company and all they care about is how much money we are going to make. So the thing is, if you want to find other people who are like that, this is where it happens. And I think for a lot of people, they want to understand their natural skills. What do I mean by natural? Because for many people, the job that you're in right now was determined by your education. It was determined by your first job. And you started in this industry, 20 years later, you're still in the industry. Nobody has ever questioned whether or not you are actually in the right job or not. Some people have been promoted. You started as a bartender, they promoted you to manager, and then you realize that actually you hate management. And all you want to do is to mix drinks. So the reality is, the astrology chart is a completely objective tool. It does not require you to link it to other things. It's you and you alone in the air era. What is it that you can actually do for people? And then from there, based on all of these, you will build the new objective based on the change that you want to produce, not based on where you're going to apply for a job, not based on what is your work experience or even how old you are. I don't think that matters. Okay, so some of the examples that we've seen here is like, these are real people and these are people that we have learned from. Now, Derek is from a very earth era type of thing. What they do is they sell tickets, people go and watch a show. And when the pandemic happened, it meant that the business was gone. And a lot of people, all the shows were cancelled. How are you going to move on? And what he said here was, something always felt off for my business. And understanding my personal astrology chart helped me to identify what is lacking and what I was great at. And today, Derek has moved into a completely new industry, and that he pioneers innovative hybrid theatre and gaming projects. He has brought theatre to the internet and also internationally. How crazy is that? Right? And people like Joel, started as an actor. Similarly, a lot of the shows and a lot of these other gigs started to dry up during the COVID period. And he said the course made me realize why I struggle with self-expression, but also the negative impact that it has. Now, I've used what I've learned about myself, and now today Joel has also moved into a different direction. He's become a vocal coach. So he started Unlock Your Voice, not to teach people how to sing like a songbird, but also to realize that many people are afraid to speak up. And now he's using voice training to give people confidence to speak up when it matters. And then there are people like Kevin, who is a maths tutor. And for him, he said, I took the business in a completely different direction as a result from courses and webinars. I can now relate to my students better. It made me a more effective tutor. When Kevin first started, he was just a tutor. Today, Kevin has his own YouTube channel. It's called Teacher Cool. And he has, in his words, he wanted to make maths cool, right? So, and I think to a large extent, a lot of these people have expanded their business. They've gone out to people who need their services in more ways than other. And I think it comes from understanding where you are coming from and not where society is going. Sing Hong is from Malaysia. And she said, after the course, I understood how to apply my strengths in helping to coach people more effectively, identifying blind spots where my partner, so on and so forth. And Sing Hong is she's the founder of Happily Love. She's helping a lot of women to understand their value and to find partners even in the midst of this chaos that's in the world. Now, when you look at all these people, now I'm not kidding you when I tell you that the common denominator is always there. Number one, these people don't work alone. Sing Hong and Kevin work with their spouse. Husband and wife are doing this together. There are people like Joel who has gone and done a lot of collaborations. Derek built an entire team, not just of theatre and makeup people, but also of VR people, gaming people, marketing people. It's amazing, right? And what people can do when small groups of people come together. And the second is that none of their bosses, there wasn't a boss, there wasn't an MNC somewhere that told them what to do. These guys went and did all of this stuff all by themselves. And the last point is that all of these people are presenting what they have directly to the people who need them. And it's never through some large organization, never through some official channel. We can do that now. And you know what's the best part? These people, none of them are starving to death. In fact, they are doing well, they are expanding, and they are optimistic about the future, what they are going to do. So none of these people are afraid of losing their jobs. None of these people are afraid of losing their income. In fact, they are telling me how busy they are and how they got no time to sit down and breathe even. Wouldn't that be nice? And a lot of their work is in contribution to the people who actually need it. So for the people who are thinking of doing this, now I'm very, very clear about the kind of people we want. And I'm not just saying that as lip service, because one of the best compliments that we always get is that when people come to our class, they tell us, I'm amazed at the quality of people you have here. Nobody here is asking for handouts. Nobody here is being like, please help me. Nothing like that. All our people are like that. They are excited. They simply want to come to a space where they are discussing those ideas. They want to know where they are strong so that they can start taking action. Here are the characteristics of people who are suitable for doing this. And you have to meet these criteria. And number one, you have to be creative. And I don't mean that you are expert at Photoshop. I don't need you to be like a wonderful violinist. Creative means that when there is nothing, you can start from a blank piece of paper and you can come up with something, right? That means you may not be creative now, but you have to be willing to be creative. And the next is you must be willing to start something new. Now, some of my students, they had businesses. Kevin was a tutor, Derek had a business, but they were willing to take a different direction. They understood what the air era was about, and they were willing to try new things. Some of my students are employees who have decided that, well, I don't want to work in that capacity anymore. I recognize the problems. I want to start something new. And these people are excited. They're not sitting around going like, yeah, Malaysia is this and that, Indonesia. No, they are excited and they know they want to do more things. In fact, more often than not, our best students tell us that, yes, I'm busy now, but I don't feel like what I'm doing has real impact. Or maybe I'm just doing stuff, but I feel like I'm just making money for my company. But this skill that I have can do more things. And these people are definitely not lazy. They're not trying to go away. They want to do more things. Now, at the same time, I want to make sure that it's quite important that, because I'm an astrologer, and a lot of people have a misconception that when you go to an astrologer, it's because you are like not in a fantastic place, and it's like a bit like counseling. Now, it can be used for that purpose, but that's not what this course is about. This course is about creation and contribution. And for that reason, we specifically do not want people who come here expecting that May is going to read your chart and May is going to tell you what to do. Because I can tell you in the upcoming years, there will be a lot of people who will tell you what to do, and you just have to be obedient. Right? And you don't have to pay any money for that. So the thing is, if you want me to tell you what to do or what your chart says, that's not what this course is about. I will teach you how to look into your own chart. You will create from there. Now, also, we are not looking for people who are struggling. Now, the reason is very simple, because if a person is struggling and living the next day is going to be very hard for you. It's very difficult for you to come for a space of contribution. We want you to start things. And if you're struggling, you cannot start things. Because people who do this need to be experimental. Is there a guarantee that something's going to work immediately? No, you might have to do it 2 or 3 times. So if you are struggling, you cannot be experimental, and this course is not for you. Now, if you need motivation, and I know a lot of people will go like, I have ideas, but I don't know, I'm motivated. There are other courses out there that are the motivational type of course. This is not it. This is an action-oriented course. Okay, so motivation is not what you're going to get here. And the last group of people are those that if you are intending to do less, and in fact, we are hearing that a lot from people. They say that they're tired, they want to be able to do very little and still somehow live their life, that this course is also not for you. If your intention is to quit everything and sit at home and click on a mouse and somehow still make a lot of money from things that increase in value, this is not the course for you. There are multiple other gurus elsewhere on the internet who are happy to tell you how you can make more money from that, but this is not that course. Okay, so that means the kind of people we're looking for are very, very similar to the 4 people that you saw earlier. That means they want to start things. And for me, it's very clear cut. Okay, I'm just going to wrap this up because I did not do this webinar for this purpose. I'm just offering this because I know lots of people are going to benefit from this. So for me, it's quite clear. The people who know they want to do this, you know you want to do this. Okay, and it's as simple as that. So I'm just going to put some details out there. So the upcoming course dates. I have a school, we have courses running all the time. Okay, so the upcoming course dates are on the 11th and 12th of December, or you can choose the 18th and 19th of December. These are Saturdays and Sundays. It's a 2-day program. People come in, you will have your birth chart with you. I will show you some of the basics, and then you get into your teams, and I will show you the steps in order to see where your strengths are, what are you lacking, who are the teammates that you actually need, and where does your direction lie. Okay, so that's what we are doing in this course. Now, the course runs from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And this is based on Singapore time. If you need some kind of conversion, please get in touch with my team and they will tell you what the time will be for your time zone. The course fee for this is $697. And I'm not one of those gurus where I'm going to slash price, offer a bonus. For us, we are straightforward people. Our course fee has always been $697, and this is exactly what it is. And for us, if you want to know if there are payment plans, are there like installments, we don't do that. There will not be installment plans because for us, it's very clear that people who struggle cannot do this program. You're not right for this program. And therefore, if this amount is a problem, that means you probably should not come here at all. All our students who have done well are people for whom they are ready to start something new and they understand exactly what they're coming to this program for. Okay, so that this is, for more information, you can get in touch with my team. And I believe my team has also, you can either scan the QR code or you can click on the link. My team has given that. And you can also, please note that this program is going to be done online on Zoom. Okay, so you can access the links if you want to. Okay, but for me, it doesn't really matter to me whether you do this program or not. Okay, because we've been running this for a long time. The purpose of the webinar is to deliver everything that I wanted to say in the first couple of hours. Because I think it's important that you don't just come and attend a doomsday webinar. Did I need to tell you about those things? Yes. But at the same time, please be part of the solution. Don't imagine that you can just do things the exact same way and somehow your 5-year plan from the last 5 years is going to be same as the 5-year plan for the next 5 years, because that is not going to be the case. And I'd like to encourage you that even if you don't do this program, that's fine. Go and find the people that you know can contribute. Right? I've given you some ideas about how we can do that. And to me, although we talk about some not very nice things, but for me, there's a huge optimism in terms of what people can now choose, and we can now fix the stuff that wasn't so great in the Earth era, and we look forward to the Air era. So I thank you for sticking with me up to this point. And I'm going to end my webinar here. But in case you had missed this earlier, we are going to put a lot of updates with regard to world events as and when my calculations show it. We are going to be sharing that on our Telegram chat. So go ahead and just scan and join. It's free. There's nothing. We haven't charged anybody a single cent, right? So our team worked for weeks just to do this. We're not making a cent out of this, right? And also, Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like a replay, I know I talk very fast, so you probably want a replay. You can access it by subscribing to my YouTube channel. You will get a notification when our video is ready, and all my other webinars are there as well. Okay, so go ahead and scan it. You might want to do that now before we end the webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for a 3-hour marathon. I'm a bit tired. I'm going to go get a rest now. And thank you guys. And please help us to share this with the people that you care about. I think what I'm saying here is a bit shocking and scary for a lot of people, but I would rather not mince words. I'd rather you know exactly what is coming so that we can prepare. I would rather people not sit in a cotton wool environment and then get a shock when things happen and it's too late for you to make an arrangement. So please help us. We do these webinars at cost to ourselves, and we never ever charge people a cent for these webinars. The only thing you can do to help us is, number one, to share it with the people you care about. And number two, when my replay is ready, please help us by making a comment. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get this message out to as many people as possible so we don't waste our effort. Okay, thank you guys, and have a good 2022.